Hello and welcome back, guys. We're now starting a new story, The Thrill of Being the Joker and the Ace, by toast_the_spaghetti_in_the_oven. You can find author's profile link in the description. Let's begin chapter 1. Everyone is not created equal. Izuku stood up from the ground. Leaning against the wall, he waited until his legs stopped shaking before he started his walk home. Clenching at his lower abdomen, he could feel the bruise from being kicked forming, as well as the burn in the shape of a hand sting more and more as he kept trying to touch it. He had already told Kacchan that he had given up on being a hero years ago, but he was still reminded every day by him no matter what. You'll never be a hero, shitty Deku. You're only a useless quirkless loser. I'll be surprised if you don't die by just stepping in a puddle wrong. Kacchan yelled at him as he grabbed his hair and pushed him to the ground, popping small explosions in his free hand. Izuku just laid there on the ground, accepting every blow to him without so much as a flinch or a tear shed. He had stopped crying and screaming out in pain around the time he gave up on his dream of being a hero. His eyes zoned out into the distance, watching other kids pass by as they left the school, sometimes even teachers. He had learned it's better to not reach out though. Kacchan and his group gave him one final kick to the stomach before walking off. As Izuku got closer to his home, he noticed more and more smoke in the air. Realizing it was in the direction of his house, he broke out into a sprint and didn't slow down until he was in front of the house. "Mom!" Izuku yelled at the top of his lungs, frantically searching the group of people surrounding the house. Running up to a few of the onlookers asking if they had seen her, tears starting to form in his eyes. He didn't know where she was and only hoped she had gone to work early today instead of waiting for him to get home. Izuku ran towards his burning home ready to pull her out if he found her, but was quickly stopped by a police officer that was helping keep people back. He struggled to get free, but the officer only held tighter. "Let me go. Let me go. She's in there. I know she's in there. I have to get her out." All he could do was scream and kick as he tried to escape the officer's grasp. "She's in there. I have T2." Izuku's heart dropped as the rest of the fire was put out and a body bag being pulled on a stretcher came out of the house. He stopped his struggling and let his body go limp, his feet slowly being placed back on the ground. The stretcher passed by him and his weak legs gave out, knees hitting the hard concrete. Eyes wide and tears falling as he watched it be put in the back of an ambulance. He watched the large doors shut and then the ambulance drive off. "She's gone," he silently whispered to himself. He sniffled and wiped his nose, trying to get back up on his feet, but to no avail, fell back to the ground. He tried again but fell forward. Hands hitting the hard concrete, tears now hitting the ground. He looked up to the house. "Izuku, you're going to be late for school," his mom yelled to him in his room from the kitchen. The tears began falling faster. "Izuku, have a good day at school, baby," his mom said, watching him put on his shoes. He wiped his tears with the sleeves of his uniform and then the palms of his hands, but more kept falling. "I'll be here waiting like usual when you come back," his mom waved from outside the front door. He put his head and his arms on the ground in front of him and cried. All he could think was that he should have been here sooner. What if he had just outrun Kacchan today? What if he left right as the bell rang? Maybe he could have gotten her out before the fire or even gone up in flames with her. One of the officers came by after he had cried all the tears he could cry. Izuku was just looking at what was left of his home. What if she was still in there and they just missed her? He shook his head, already knowing the answer. The officer placed a hand on his shoulder and quietly Izuku asked, "What caused it?" The officer, now kneeling next to him, looked at the house and simply stated, "It's believed it was caused by a quirk. There were scorch marks on higher parts of the home. We think she lost control of her quirk and trapped herself, burning to death." As simple as it was stated, Izuku's heart was running circles. His mom didn't have a fire quirk. The fire was started on purpose and whoever did it trapped his mom inside. His heart sank as the realization of the one person who could have done it crossed his mind. Anger rose inside of him but only flashed across his face for a second before dying off with the rest of his emotions. He should have stayed away after walking out the first time. The officer beside him slowly raised to their feet, pulling Izuku along with him. The officer pulled him away and walked him to his car. Getting into the back, Izuku looked at the house one last time, whispering a soft, "goodbye," before the car drove off. "So kid, you have any family you can stay with?" the officer in front said, eyes never leaving the road. "No." Izuku stated while still staring out the window. "No, I don't." Chapter 2, Foster Family. Izuku stood next to the foster care lady as she knocked on the door, a folder in her other hand. He was in his school uniform and was holding onto the straps of his backpack. As they waited for the door to be answered, he could feel the disgusted stare coming from her beside him. Izuku only continued to look at the floor, trying to prepare to put on his best fake smile. It's not often someone accepts you even after finding out you're quirkless. So he was grateful to the family for letting him stay with them. He was trying to get his face to rest in the familiar fake smile instead of the usual impassive face he sported when the door opened. A woman with white hair like spider silk looked down at Izuku and then up at the lady next to him. "Welcome, come in," she greeted them as she waved them in with a smile. The three of them walked to the living room where a man with lizard eyes and tongue was already sitting on one of the couches. The woman with the silk hair sat next to the man, while Izuku and the foster care lady sat on the couch across from them. Sitting down, he couldn't look at them, so he just grabbed his knees and smiled his small fake smile at the ground. The foster care lady put the folder she was carrying on the coffee table in front of her and opened it. She put a hand flat out in front of Izuku as if offering something, then stated, "This is Izuku Midoriya, your new foster child." Izuku looked up at the couple as they continued to listen to the lady talk about him. He is 13 and is in the second year of middle school. Due to you living close enough, there is no need to transfer him to another school unless you would like to. He recently lost his mother, and besides his father, who we haven't been able to contact or find, he has no relatives to speak of. And as you were informed before offering to take him in. The foster lady sighed. The boy is quirkless. Izuku searched the couple's faces for any form of disgust or displeasure, waiting for them to suddenly change their minds and tell the foster care lady to take him back. That they didn't want him. But they didn't. Instead, they just smiled at Izuku. Gentle and caring smiles. Then the woman with silk hair spoke up, "Hello Izuku Midoriya, it is very nice to meet you. Welcome to your new home." The woman grabbed her husband's hand, "We both hope you enjoy your stay." Izuku's smile brightened into something more real. He couldn't believe they had accepted him, quirkless and all. Seeing as her work was done, the foster care lady closed the folder in front of her and stood up. She opened up her jacket and pulled out 2 envelopes from a pocket and placed them on the table. "Here is the check for Midoriya, and I figured I'd just bring Shinso's along with me as well." The couple nodded and said their thanks and then walked the lady to the door. They said their goodbyes and slowly closed the door behind her. Once the door was finally closed, Izuku's new foster parents deflated. They both walked back to where Izuku was sitting, smiles now gone as if never there to begin with. His smile quickly faded as well, and his blank impassive face devoid of emotion resurfaced. He looked back at the ground as they sat across from him again. He knew it couldn't be true, and yet here he was fooled again by stupid hope. "Let's get some things straight, brat," the man began in a rough tone. "You will address us as sir and ma'am only. None of that mommy-daddy bullshit. We know you're weak and all because of the no quirk thing, but we expect you to have all the chores completed by the end of the day and house completely cleaned by the end of the week, as well as anything else we ask of you." The woman pointed at his bag. "Hand it over," she said in a sharp tone. Izuku did it without trying to resist. She poured out everything from his bag onto the coffee table and then began searching the rest of the bag for anything else. After completely emptying the bag, she spoke up again while looking through everything scattered in front of her. "We don't care how you do at school, don't get good grades expecting us to be proud, or be stuck and want help on homework." She stopped looking through his stuff for a second and looked at him, eyes stern. we better not get any sort of phone calls from the school or be expected to come in because it won't end well for you. She went back to looking through his stuff. Izuku already knew he was going to get kicked out and put back in the foster care system. No one wanted a quirkless kid, and after the first phone call to his new home about supposedly starting a fight, it's going to be pretty quick. The woman searching his stuff suddenly held up one of his notebooks. What's this? Work to prepare to be a hero. She laughed and her husband soon joined in. What, you think you could be a hero, a quirkless brat? Great, now we have two useless kids with useless dreams. Izuku stared at the notebook in her hands as she started flipping through the pages, simply just stating the truth. No. Ma'am, it's analysis I do on heroes. It's sort of like a hobby of mine. Because really that's all it was at this point. Suddenly the side of his face stung. As soon as he had finished talking, someone had slapped him. He looked to the man now standing in front of him, a furious look on his face. Did we say you could speak? Izuku shook his head. No, what? The man said, tone sharp. No, sir. Izuku didn't remember them saying this rule. Maybe they just hadn't gotten to it yet, and he interrupted. It didn't matter though, because being slapped was nothing compared to being burned. He could hardly feel the sting of the slap anymore, but the handprint was probably still there. Good, now hurry and clean up this mess and we'll show you to where you'll be sleeping. The man pointed to the mess of his stuff scattered all over the coffee table and then walked away into the kitchen. As Izuku put all his stuff in his bag, he could hear the couple whispering in the kitchen and then the opening of a bottle. After he finished, he put his bag on his back and cleared his throat as if to give a sign that he was done. He heard a long sigh accompanied by some shuffling. The woman popped out of the kitchen, looked at Izuku, irritation written on her face, and then started walking in the opposite direction towards a hallway. He followed her down the hallway until he was standing next to her in front of a closed door. This is where you will stay. Bathroom is down the hall. She pointed to a door a few feet down the hallway. Lights out 9 o'clock. We're not waking you up for school or getting you there. Izuku nodded and went to open the door when she spoke up again. I'm warning you now, don't take off the muzzle or he will brainwash you with his villain quirk. With that she left back down the hallway, leaving him alone. Izuku slowly turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. Sitting on one of the beds was a lanky boy with purple hair, bags under his eyes, and a muzzle. He was writing something down on a sheet of paper when he looked up at Izuku as he walked into the room. Izuku waved to him with an awkward smile as a way to greet him, and the purple-haired boy waved back with a confused look on his face. Izuku put his backpack on the other bed. He sat down, laid back, and let out a long sigh as he closed his eyes and thought about everything that had happened until now. A small tear escaped from one of his eyes as he thought about his mother, and anything to remember her by was now gone. He popped up and wiped the tear away just as fast as it came. Izuku looked at the boy, who seemed to be startled by him for a second, but quickly he looked back down at his work. Izuku stared at the boy with the muzzle as he went back to work on the paper. Without even thinking about it, Izuku walked over and took the muzzle off, scaring the other boy even more. What are you doing? You'll get in trouble. Izuku simply just shrugged. The name's Izuku Midoriya. I'm your new roommate. Izuku had a small smirk in the corner of his mouth as he held out his hand. The purpled hair boy looked at Izuku and then at his hand and then back at Izuku, confusion littering his face. Didn't they tell you about me? About how you're not supposed to take the muzzle off or I'll brainwash you? About my villain quirk? Will you? No. The purple-haired boy just couldn't wrap his head around this new kid. Well, then what is there to be afraid of? I have a villain's quirk, doesn't that scare you even a little bit? Nah, no quirk is born a villain quirk or a hero quirk. Izuku swatted the air. It all just depends on how the person with the quirk uses it that makes it a good or evil quirk. Izuku leaned forward and looked straight into the lanky boy's eyes, now fully serious. So do you want to use your quirk and be what everyone thinks you're going to be, a villain, or use what sounds like a cool quirk for something good, like a hero. Saying the boy was shocked was an understatement. Everyone he had ever met since getting his quirk has treated him like a villain. He was given up by his actual parents and tossed around in foster care for a while. When he settled down here he thought it was going to be different, but he got a muzzle that he isn't allowed to take off almost ever. The boy took the hand reached out to him and shook it. Hitoshi Shinso. I want to be a hero, he said with a small awkward smile on his face. Izuku smiled back and suddenly couldn't hold back anymore. She said your quirk is brainwashing. Is that really what it's called? Shinso gave a slight nod. Izuku's eyes lit up. How does it work? Can you brainwash anyone? How many people can you do at a time? What can you make them do? How do you activate it? Can you dash? Izuku suddenly cut himself off and covered his mouth. Shinso's smile dropped, thinking the fear just hit later for Izuku. But Izuku put out his arms in front of him and waved them around frantically. Sorry, I was rambling again. I thought I had gotten it under control. You didn't do anything wrong. Your quirk just seems so interesting from the name alone. Shinso breathed a quiet sigh of relief and looked up at Izuku. Do you really want to know how it works? Izuku frantically nodded his head. Ye dash. His eyes glazed over and he stood up straight. But just as quick as it happened it went away. Izuku's eyes went wide. He ran to his bed and pulled out his hero analysis notebook. Looking down at it for a split second, realizing it was now technically the first of its kind because all the others were gone with the fire. He walked back over to Shinso and casually sat on his bed facing him as if they had been friends for years. He started muttering and writing about Shinso's quirk, but so quiet Shinso could hardly pick out anything Izuku was saying. Suddenly Izuku's head popped up from his notebook and he looked Shinso right in the eyes and just exclaimed, your quirk is so cool and you'll make an amazing hero. Shinso felt his face flush, but Izuku didn't notice and just went back to writing. No one had ever complimented his quirk, much less told him he could be a hero. Both Shinso and Izuku had forgotten where they were when the door swung open and the man with the lizard features started yelling, Shinso, did you take your muzzle off without permission? What did we say about doing that? We will give you right back to the system if you don't follow our rules. Shinso's face dropped and all the happiness was gone in an instant. The man walked over and raised his hand as Shinso put the muzzle back on. Izuku quickly stood in front of him. He didn't take it off, I did. Izuku was slapped across the face. What did we tell you about not speaking unless spoken to? Weren't you warned about his villain quirk? Did he brainwash you somehow to take it off? No sir, it was all me. Any punishment you're going to give to Shinso, give it to me, he did nothing wrong. Izuku got slapped across the face again and then punched in the gut. Seemingly satisfied with just that, the man walked out of the room yelling to go to bed as he slammed the door behind him. Izuku looked back at Shinso and took the muzzle back off of him. Shinso looked worried and pulled the muzzle back to his face, but soon gave up as Izuku continued to try and rip it off of him. The muzzle now off against his will, Shinso spoke up, are you okay? You took those hits like they were nothing. Izuku put the muzzle on Shinso's bedside table. Yeah, I'm fine, I've had worse. He sort of hits like a little girl. Shinso started laughing a bit, but he soon was laughing so hard he had to hold his stomach. What's the matter? Why are you laughing so hard? Sorry. He stopped laughing and wiped the small tears forming in his eyes. I knew I was getting a roommate, but you were not what I was expecting. What were you expecting then? Izuku said, a bit taken aback. Some weak, sad, and traumatized little kid with either a weak or villain quirk. But you are none of those things. You're not even afraid of my quirk either. Izuku felt his face go red, he grabbed his notebook, turned around, and stomped over to his bed. I'm going to bed, he announced. It was a little past 9, the room was dark and both boys were mostly snug in bed. Shinso carefully took off his muzzle. Hey, are you awake? He quietly asked. Yeah, why? Midoriya call me Izuku, okay, then call me Hitoshi. They both sat in silence for a little bit before Shinso spoke up again, Izuku. He said it as if testing out the name. What is it, Toshi? Shinso's face flushed a bit from the sudden nickname, but he didn't mind it. Are you indestructible or something? What's your quirk? He heard Izuku shift in his bed and roll over so he was facing away from him. Do you really want to know? Yeah, it can't be anything worse than mine anyway. Can it? I actually don't have a quirk. I'm quirkless. Shinso shot up in bed and looked over to Izuku because what's worse than having a villainous quirk was no quirk at all. He thought back to when Izuku casually just took off his muzzle and took the hits for him like they were nothing. Then he thought back to when Izuku had told him his quirk was cool and that he would make a great hero. He slowly laid back down and looked over at Izuku, to be able to take a blow like that and not even be scared of a villainous quirk like mine. Honestly, Izuku, you're so much cooler than any quirk I could think of. Shinso put on his muzzle, then rolled over and went to bed. Izuku went to bed that night with a real smile on his face for the first time in a long time. Chapter 3, A True Friend Stabs You in the Front. Izuku walked through the door and straight to his room. It had been about a week and a half since he moved in. Adjusting to the new lifestyle is tiring, but he gets a roof over his head and food, most of the time. Hitoshi was already home like usual and had started on homework in his bed when Izuku walked in, closing the door behind him. Hearing the click of the door closing, Hitoshi took off the muzzle. Izuku had told him to take it off when it was just the two of them, giving him glares when he didn't. Hitoshi signed a "welcome back" with his hands just in case Ma'am was walking around in the hallway. They had discovered a few days in that they both knew sign language and started communicating in that when they needed to be silent, or when Hitoshi needed to keep the muzzle on. They had gotten pretty close in the week. They spend a lot of time just sitting in silence doing their own thing. Not because of awkwardness or not knowing what to talk about, but simply it's just how they enjoy it. From time to time Hitoshi would ask Izuku for help on a homework question and Izuku would give his quirk analysis on a hero he saw on the way home from school. Most lengthy conversations took place after lights out. As they whisper and giggle to each other about things that happened at school or favorite heroes. They both found they had a shared interest in the underground hero Eraserhead, though Izuku still had his love for All Might even if it was smaller after giving up on his dream. But it was mainly silence between the two and doing their own things because just the company of the other person without being hated was enough. Izuku started on homework considering it was the easiest part of his day. All of his classes were way too easy. Hitoshi was learning relatively the same thing and he seemed to be struggling with some of it like math, often asking Izuku for help with it. After homework were chores and those were a little more time-consuming. Sometimes he would have to clean the same thing over and over again because Ma'am didn't like how it looked. He often did more of the chores because his foster parents didn't like Hitoshi leaving his room for too long, just in case he tried to brainwash them. After all that, it was Izuku time for a couple of hours until dinner. He and Hitoshi shared an old laptop that had been given to Hitoshi in one of his past homes. Izuku had taken up the interest in hacking around the beginning of his second year of middle school. Even though most of his notes were destroyed in the fire, he luckily remembered most of the stuff he learned without a problem. He had gotten pretty good at it but still had a long way to go to be considered anywhere good. Around this time dinner was ready, though some days he luckily didn't have to cook dinner, and Sir returned home from work. Dinner frustrated Izuku because while Ma'am and Sir ate dinner in front of the TV without a care in the world, he had to sit alone while Hitoshi wasn't allowed to leave the room. Before Izuku, Hitoshi would often be forgotten and go days without eating. Now Izuku would make sure he had a meal every night, even if it meant having to share the little bit he was given. Tonight was different. Instead of them already eating in the living room, they were sitting at the table. Arms or hands crossed in front of them and both sitting in front of an empty chair, which Izuku assumed was his, and sat down in it. As soon as he sat down Sir started talking, "We got a call from the school today. Care to explain yourself?" Izuku just sat quietly, he didn't know what to say. Although he couldn't hide from Kacchan during lunch, he did manage to outrun him after school again. Kacchan had started calming down a bit after school and stopped chasing him all the way out to the school gate every day. He wasn't even late to class today, so what was the issue that needed to be called home about this time? A slap crossed his face, but he didn't look up. "Speak up, brat. Why am I getting a call from school about you instigating a fight?" Izuku truly didn't know what to say because there was no right answer to say. While he knows that he never started the fight, no one else would believe him. He got another slap across the face. "They said you instigated a fight with some of the other students." "I didn't." Izuku finally spoke up. "Are you saying that I'm wrong?" Sir angrily said. "No, sir." Izuku frantically shook his head. "So what are you trying to say you didn't too, huh?" Sir began to stand up. "I didn't start or instigate a fight, sir." Izuku knew saying the truth wouldn't result in a better ending, but there was nothing else he could say or do. Sir walked over to Izuku and pulled him out of the chair. "You're lying to me now, brat." Then pushed him to the floor. "I swear I didn't, I'm not ly-." Izuku got a punch to the face. "Stop lying and tell me the truth," he said, voice furious. "I didn't." Izuku got another hard slap to the face. This went on for a couple of minutes until eventually Sir got bored of Izuku leaving him for the TV and dinner after kicking him in the gut. Izuku laid there for a while trying to steady his breathing from getting the wind knocked out of him from the kick. He dragged himself back to his room, opening the door holding his stomach. Hitoshi had looked up from the computer and was immediately worried. Izuku collapsed onto his bed without even glancing at Hitoshi. Izuku didn't hear him get up. When he opened his eyes, Hitoshi was in front of him, sitting on the floor next to Izuku's bed. Instead of being startled though, Izuku reached out to Hitoshi's face and pulled off his muzzle, then let his arm drop and hang off his bed. "I'm fine, don't worry," Izuku said right as Hitoshi was about to say something. "Are you sure?" Hitoshi wanted to help him but didn't know what to do. There was no way Izuku was fine after seeing him walk in like that. "Yeah, it's way better than being burned," Izuku casually let slip. "What?" Izuku was getting burned. By who? Did it happen in his old home? Was he abused in his last home too? Does it happen at school? Hitoshi had so many questions from that one statement alone that his worry for Izuku increased. "Izuku, are you still getting burned?" Izuku sat up. He didn't want to talk about the bullying that happens at school to Hitoshi because simply there was no point. It wasn't like he would be able to do anything. Izuku just shrugged. "I get bullied at school, it's not a big deal, so just forget about it. It's the struggle of being quirkless." Izuku laid back down now, looking away from Hitoshi. "I'm fine, I promise. I'm going to bed a little early tonight." Izuku heard Hitoshi get up and the door open. A couple of minutes later he heard the door click close and something cold press against his cheek. "I snuck some ice." "Sleep well," Hitoshi whispered, then climbed back into his bed and picked up where he left off before Izuku had walked in. A few weeks had passed and Izuku was now just another punching bag for someone else. It at first was just a few hits after another phone call about him instigating a fight at school. Then it evolved into Sir having a bad day at work or when he would drink and take out his stress and anger on Izuku. Every day was getting more and more exhausting, and most days he didn't want to go to school because it was just beating after beating, Kacchan or not, then going home to another beating. He was tired, but if he wasn't at school or was late it would result in another phone call and another beating. The only thing keeping him going back to the house was Hitoshi. He couldn't watch Hitoshi be hit, so Izuku would try to take the hits as best as possible. Though this just makes Hitoshi worry, and a lot of reassuring from Izuku that he was fine. There were a lot of nights where Hitoshi was sneaking into the kitchen and getting Izuku ice. Today was no different so far. Izuku got home after running from Kacchan's goons but still ended up being caught. He got home as quickly as possible and dragged his feet to his room, collapsing onto his bed the minute he saw it. "Need help applying the burn cream today," he heard Hitoshi say from his bed. Izuku rolled onto his back. "Nah, I think I'm good." It was less explosions and more fists and feet today. Hitoshi really wanted to help in some way, but Izuku more often than not just pushed him away, saying, "There is nothing you can do. I just have to wait for the pain to subside a little, then I'll be fine." It was always, "I'm fine," and "I'll be fine," and Hitoshi was honestly getting tired of hearing it because he knew it wasn't true. But there was nothing he could do, so he just went back to homework. "If there is anything you need, let me know." Izuku didn't know what he did to deserve Hitoshi, and while he was the only thing keeping him coming back to this hell hole, he felt bad because he was thinking about leaving. Sneaking out and never coming back. Izuku got up to do chores. He needed to clean the kitchen today. Izuku was just about finishing up when Sir walked through the front door. He took off his shoes, walked to the living room, collapsed onto the couch, and turned on the TV. Izuku had stopped from what he was doing to see what Sir would do, but after nothing happening returned to wiping the counter. About a minute later a voice was heard from the living room. "Brat, bring me a beer," Sir said in a low demanding voice. Izuku did just that, popping it open then bringing it to Sir in the living room. He handed him the bottle then walked back to the kitchen. Izuku continued to clean when he heard another "brat" from the living room. So he popped another bottle open and dropped it off in the hands of the man in the living room, picking up the other bottle in the process. Izuku was cleaning the inside of the sink when he heard again another "brat" from the living room. So he gave Sir another bottle and threw away the finished bottle. This time he could feel his eyes on him instead of the TV as he walked away. This happened a few more times, resulting in the man reeking of beer and had gotten himself drunk. Izuku wiped the last of the kitchen clean and threw away the paper towel. He backed up a little to see his work as he wiped the sweat off his forehead with his arm. He let out a sigh when the man in the living room called for him again. Izuku walked over and stood to the side of him. Sir looked up at him and then patted the spot next to him on the couch. "Sit." Confused, Izuku obeyed because it was better than getting hit for no reason. Izuku sat next to Sir but put some distance between them and just stared at the TV until he said something else. "Closer," he heard from Sir, so Izuku scooted a few centimeters closer. Then he heard it again, "Closer." So Izuku scooted a few centimeters closer again but still tried to keep as much distance as possible. Suddenly Sir put his hand around his waist and pulled Izuku right next to him, but didn't remove his hand. Izuku just continued to watch the sports game going on the television. But he didn't know what to do when all of a sudden there was a hand under his shirt. Izuku didn't know what to do when Sir started caressing his chest. He didn't know what to do when the button to his pants was undone. He didn't know what to do when "Don't move" was whispered into his ear and a hand moved down into his pants. Izuku froze. Izuku froze as a hand started to slide his inner thighs. He froze as a hand began to touch and feel and squeeze. Izuku was frozen and didn't know what to do as he was fondled. Then it stopped, but he didn't move. He waited. He heard a snore from the man next to him and looked over to see Sir asleep. He carefully removed his hand, stood up, buttoned his pants, and quietly walked back to his room. He stood in front of the closed door and let out a long sigh. His heart was beating so fast and he was on the verge of tears, just barely holding them back, so as not to scare Toshi. He was done. He couldn't live another day in this shithole of a house. So he started planning in secret and a week later packed his stuff in the middle of the night and left. Leaving a note on his bed that said, "I'm sorry, Toshi," and a note on the kitchen table that said, "I took his muzzle, so don't touch him." He was gone before the sun rose. Chapter 4, Chin deep in mud. Izuku was sitting on the couch watching TV when he heard the front door slam and soft heavy thumps slowly make their way into the living room. Hisashi entered the room and put his stuff down on the kitchen counter. He looked over to the TV where an interview of All Might was playing and then his eyes landed on Izuku and his face formed into a scowl. Hisashi marched over to Izuku and pulled him by his hair off the couch. What's a useless little SHT like you doing lying on my furniture? Especially since said piece of SHT should be at school. He threw Izuku to the ground, kicking him into the small table next to the couch. Huh, you going to answer me, or can your quirkless but suddenly not speak? Izuku, while still being kicked, slowly spoke up. Was sick, so mommy, picked me up early. Hisashi stopped the kicking and watched as Izuku coughed while trying to catch his breath. He then reached down and grabbed him by his hair. He slammed the back of Izuku's head into the small side table behind the boy. So I have a quirkless and now sick, little SHT in my house. Could you get any more useless? Hisashi threw him back to the floor and continued to kick him, all while Izuku cried and pleaded for his dad to stop. Suddenly Inko rushed into the living room with only one shoe on and pushed Hisashi away. She knelt down and cradled Izuku in her arms. Inko then turned and glared at Hisashi. What do you think you're doing? He's just a boy, she yelled. Izuku gripped the shirt of his mother as quiet sobs escaped him. Hisashi just looked down at Izuku, face still filled with fury for the boy. Then stormed off, grabbed a bottle of alcohol from a cabinet, and slammed the front door behind him. Izuku jolted awake and quickly sat up, the makeshift blankets falling off of him. He was in the corner of an abandoned storage container he had found. The sun was starting to bleed in from the entrance and Izuku knew it was time to get up. He unraveled himself from the old cloths and sheets he was laying in, put on a jacket over the school uniform he was already wearing, and opened the heavy door to the entrance of the storage container. He began his walk to school. On the way back to his current home, he, after a lot of practice and trying not to be caught, pickpocketed a few people for any spare change. He then made his way over to the vending machines near where he was staying, exchanging all the money for any food and drinks he could get. He stopped going to any grocery stores for the risk of being caught due to cameras, and after he had picked up the skill of stealing and pickpocketing to get certain needs. He had gotten a few spare shirts, pants, and a hoodie. Eventually, he got his hands on a computer and would often go to cafes to continue to learn to hack. Although in the past it was just a hobby he started to pick up out of boredom, it was now more of a skill he knew would eventually help him out. Izuku put a couple of bottles of water and a few bags of chips in his bag before shouldering it. He began the short walk back to his storage container. He took out his phone, which he managed to find before he left after it was taken by his foster parents, and scrolled through the news a bit. He arrived at his current home, pulled open the big doors, and closed them after walking inside. Izuku put his bag down next to the pile of old blankets and sheets he took from the bed when he left his foster house. He also found a few pieces of fabric in dumpsters and on the street. Izuku changed into something warmer and collapsed into his pile, wrapping and burying himself as best he can to stay warm. Then tried to fall asleep. Tossing and turning in his makeshift bed, Izuku just couldn't manage to sleep. So he sat up, put on his shoes, and walked out the door of the storage container. Hands in the pocket of his hoodie, he briskly walked. He walked through the streets without even the slightest idea of a destination. Izuku just walked. Eventually, he stopped and a steel gate blocking the entrance to a cemetery stood tall in front of him. He kind of questioned how he got here considering he had only really been here twice. Izuku took off the chain that wasn't evenly securely locked and put his hand on the bars. It squeaked as he slowly opened it just enough to sneak in. He walked over to a familiar gravestone. Standing in front of it, he kissed his hand, kneeled down, and placed his hand on the top of the stone. "Miss you, Mom. Sorry I haven't been visiting, my foster parents didn't like me visiting you, saying they didn't want me to get any ideas, they apparently really need the money or something. I've also kind of been a bit busy trying to get things figured out with this whole surviving thing." He let out a half-hearty laugh and sat down next to her gravestone and leaned against it. "I don't know how you made it look so easy." He patted the grass in front of the stone. "Oh." Izuku shot up from casually leaning against the gravestone. "You'll never guess what happened." He paused for a sec, almost imagining all the answers she would be giving him. watching her face go from happy to worried to excited again, just waiting for the news. I made a friend. His name is Hitoshi Shinso. He's kind of like me in a way. He was bullied for something he had no control over. But he's a super cool person and he's got the most amazing quirk no matter what other people say. Izuku continued to go on about Shinso, talking about his quirk and telling small stories of their short time together, all while animatedly throwing his hands around in the air. You'd really like him. I wish he could meet you. But I don't think I'll be seeing him for a while. I feel really guilty leaving him the way I did. Izuku leaned his head against the stone. A lot has changed since you've been gone. His voice cracked as the last of his words came out. Warm tears began pooling down his face and Izuku couldn't stop them. Izuku awoke with a jolt and sat up quickly. He looked around and realized he was still in the cemetery. Only about an hour had passed and it felt nice to have even that short amount of sleep in. One of the most relaxing night sleeps he's gotten in a good while, and he was sleeping on the ground. Izuku stood up, said goodbye to his mom and started his walk back to his current living quarters, the storage unit. Izuku passed in front of an alley and, sparing a quick glance, then came to a halt at the picture. He saw the sight of a girl in a school uniform standing over a man who was slouched against the wall of a building behind him. She was holding a knife and from where Izuku was standing could see it was covered in something dark. The girl brought the knife to her mouth and began to lick the blade clean. She then looked over to where Izuku was standing and a wide smile spread across her face. "Hiya, you look a little young to be out so late at night." She bounced towards Izuku as he backed away a bit as she got closer. "Could say the same about you." Izuku lifted his hand and pointed at the man behind her. "He dead." She stopped. "That perverted old man." Her thumb gestured to the said guy who looked pretty much dead, and she half turned to look at him, then back at Izuku. "Probably. Never actually checked. Even if he wasn't, he will be soon." "Why? You know him or something?" Izuku just shook his head. "No, just curious." She lowered her knife he hadn't even realized she raised. "It shouldn't exist any longer." The girl smiled and skipped closer to him. "So what's your name anyway, cutie?" "Mine's Himiko Toga." Izuku began to back away again. "Midoriya." "Izuku Midoriya. Why? Zuku. That's such a cute name." She lifted her knife and ran towards Izuku. "Under different circumstances, I think we would have been really good friends." Izuku just barely dodged the knife being swung at his face. He turned around and started running down the sidewalk, but he didn't get far as he felt Toga right on his tail. He turned down another alley and came straight to a dead end as the wall to a building stood tall in front of him, preventing any form of escape. He turned around and again just barely dodged a knife being swung down onto his shoulder. He tried to run forward and punch her, but she just danced around any attempt. For being in such a life-threatening situation, Izuku couldn't help but feel a slight thrill crawl up his spine as he tried to fight off Toga from killing him. Izuku stepped back and lost his balance trying to dodge her knife as she moved it forward towards his face. He felt the small cut start to bleed on his cheek as he fell on his back. Toga pointed the knife to his face as she stood over him. Izuku was dead. No point in fighting anymore because there was no fight left. He relaxed his limbs and felt the impassive face wash over him as he stared up at her, giving up and accepting his fate. She sat on top of him, the knife held loosely in her hand. She then smiled and gripped the handle tight, brought the blade above her head, and brought it down. Chapter 5, all for just $1. Toga sitting on top of him brought the blade down on Izuku but just barely nicked the top of his shoulder blade as she stabbed the ground right next to his head. The smile dropped from her face and she suddenly looked like she was pouting. "Why'd you suddenly give up like that? You were doing so well at first." Izuku put his hands up in front of him almost like he was surrendering, but his face didn't show it. He didn't look scared or like he was afraid by the fact that he literally could have just died. He wasn't shaking or looking as if he was going to wet his pants. No, Izuku had a blank stare as he peered up at Toga. "What can I say?" the minute I knew there was no point in fighting back I stopped. Gave up. Izuku was going to shrug his shoulders, but remembering the knife way too close for comfort didn't want to disturb it and cause any more unnecessary damage and pain before his death. Toga tilted her head with a look of confusion written on her face, but that doesn't much explain why. She crossed her arms in front of her as she started to think. Why what? The confusion now also littered Izuku's face. How hard was it to understand that he gave up? I knew I wasn't going to win or anything or be able to escape in any way, so why draw it out? But Zuku, you didn't even try or attempt anything silly. Toga said it like the answer was right in front of his face. She pulled the knife out of the ground and started waving it around. Like at first I was all like whoosh and swing with my knife, and you totally dodged it, which was like super cool. She swung her knife around in the air as she acted out the last 5 minutes of her trying to stab him. But then you tripped and then stopped. She looked down at him waiting for an answer. I lack all experience compared to you, so I was doing what I could until I couldn't do anything. There was no point trying to do anything more after I tripped, because quite frankly there was nothing I could do that would prolong the inevitable suffering. Izuku mumbled out. So you totally just dodged my knife like that with no experience or skills. Then how? Nah. Liar. She shook her head. You pick a few things up from being bullied all your life. This time Izuku did shrug his shoulders. Just like knowing when to give up and knowing there is no point in continuing to try and fight back. Makes sense, but Zuku, you're kind of sad. She shook her head again, then stopped, and Izuku watched as her face lit up. Like a light bulb just went off in her brain. Which it did. What if I give you a few lessons? So then next time you don't just give up but actually try, because then you'll have like the skills and experience. She looked as if that was the greatest idea anyone has ever come up with. Honestly, it wasn't a bad idea though. Izuku thought and contemplated it, and the more he thought about the greater it sounded. He gets a skill and the basics down of someone who looks like she knows what she's doing with a knife. He doesn't need a quirk for this either, it's just learning and skill. But all this halted when Izuku remembered nothing comes for free, especially for him. But what's in it for you? What do you want in return? Nothing much. She slid her finger across a cut on his face, then liked her finger. How much BLD we talkin'? Just bring me a bag or something of it. That should be fine, because any more I think would slow you down and make it harder for you to learn silly. Sounds reasonable. If we've come to an agreement, can you get off of me now? Toga looked down and realized she was still sitting on top of him. She rolled off of him, then bounced up onto her feet as Izuku slowly started to rise as well. I knew we would be great friends. She was bouncing up and down. Let's get started right away. She ran towards Izuku, the knife held in front of her. Izuku dropped back down to his knees in order to avoid the knife being swung at his face. About that. Toga stopped in the middle of her advancement and looked at him confused. As fun as that sounds. I still have school in the morning that I probably shouldn't miss. As true as that sounded, Izuku was honestly just way too tired to start right now. Toga dropped her hand with the knife to her side and pouted a bit. Alrighty. I get it. Then we'll start tomorrow. She pointed her knife to the ground in front of her. Meet here around midnight tomorrow. That was it. Then she skipped to the open end of the alley. Right as she was turning the corner to go down the street, she turned back to Izuku and waved. And said with the biggest smile on her face, fangs and all, bye-bye Zuku. See you tomorrow. Then she left. Izuku walked back to his storage container, mind circling a bit with everything that just happened. He stepped into the storage container, laid down on his makeshift bed, and passed out almost immediately, because he definitely wasn't lying about the being tired part. Midnight rolled around the next day and Izuku was walking into the same alley he almost died in. He was wearing the same hoodie as yesterday and a pair of sweats that may have been a bit too big. Izuku was walking farther into the alley ready to wait when someone ran up behind him and jumped on his back giggling. Zuku. You actually came. And is that, Toga slowly got off Izuku and walked around to face him. Why wouldn't I? A deal is a deal. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck as he let an awkward laugh. It was a bit difficult to actually figure out a way to get from here. He pointed to himself, into a bag. Izuku rubbed the bandage in the crease of his arm where he had continually stuck a needle in just looking for a vein. Toga squatted down in front of him and very gently put the bag on the ground as if it were glass. She opened it as carefully as possible and dipped her pinky finger in. She took it out, then wiped her finger clean with a wide grin plastered over her face. Toga got up, bag in hand, after closing it up thoroughly and placed it near a dumpster. She turned around, smile still on her face, and pulled out a knife. Let's begin, she said as she ran towards Izuku. Through Toga he learned the basics. Every night at midnight she taught him how to wield a knife, how to dodge one, and how to dodge punches and kicks being thrown at him. But it was just the base of everything. So after school, when he would come home from a long day's worth of being beat by bullies and pickpocketing, Izuku would practice. He would swing around a knife Toga had given him, moving it forward, slicing through the air, jabbing the empty space around him. Izuku also started teaching himself through videos and hero fights how to better and properly throw a punch, a kick, and just fighting in general. A few weeks passed and he was no longer laying on the ground in defeat with bruises and cuts all over him. Instead, when sparring with Toga, he would either come out victorious or from time to time she would give him the slip and come out on top at the last second. But as he quickly improved, Izuku didn't feel the same thrill he did fighting Toga as he did when he was fighting her in the beginning. He really wanted that feeling back. One day Izuku came at the usual time to meet up with Toga, but instead of her just rushing him the minute he stepped into the alley, she just leaned against a wall twirling her knife, waiting. She noticed Izuku and started bouncing towards him with a wide smile on her face. Zuku. She stopped in front of him. I got something special for you. Toga reached behind her and pulled out two identical knives in sheaths. Izuku pulled them out and waved them around. They were more of a dagger and were sharp on each side of the blade that came to a point. He touched the blade of one of them and immediately started bleeding from the small cut. What are these for? These are my graduation gift to you. I've taught you all that I could. They are also a parting gift. Izuku knew she was gonna leave, but he would be lying if he said he wasn't just a little bit sad. Don't be sad though, because you can't get rid of me that easily, silly. We're best friends, Zuku. Toga rushed forward and hugged Izuku. It was so unexpected that he just stood there, arms pinned to his sides. As fast as it happened, it was just as quickly over and Toga was skipping down the alley. She turned around and waved at Izuku. Hope you like your gift. See you later, Zuku. She turned the corner down the street and just like that Toga was gone. Izuku felt like he had all this free time now in his night. He was unable to ever get a proper night's rest and was stuck kind of bored in the middle of the night. That was until the idea popped into his head. He went out that evening and got himself a dark green hoodie, because it went with his hair and eyes, but also because it was the only one he could find on such short notice, black jeans and sweatpants, a black beanie, a pair of black boots, and a pack of black surgical masks. The next night Izuku dressed up in his all-black attire and jumped into the first fight he felt would give him the greatest thrill. Izuku rushed in and pushed a woman away from a man with crab claws as hands. She was trying to run away when the man with the claws had grabbed her. He rushed the man without hesitation, the situation already assessed and a few weaknesses already crossing his mind. Izuku was picked up as if he weighed nothing by one of the crab claws, and as he struggled to break free the man let out a deep laugh. What's a kid doing out on the streets this late? You think you're the SHT or something and can do anything? You better scram home to your parents. Izuku smiled. He knew this was going to be exciting. Izuku unsheathed one of his knives from his hoodie pocket and stabbed it into the arm right before where the claw started on the man. The man yelled in pain and dropped Izuku. You're gonna get it now, brat. He swung his claws trying to hit Izuku. Izuku dodged them like they were nothing and ran around the man, giving him small cuts all over his body. Nothing deep enough but just enough to cause serious pain over time the more the man got. Crab claws eventually did land a hit on Izuku and sent him flying into a wall. Izuku landed on his feet and stumbled a bit. He rubbed the back of his head then looked up with a scowl on his face. "Kinda wished you didn't do that," he said as he rushed the man. Izuku sent a kick at the man's knees which caused the man to lose his balance and begin to fall. Izuku stabbed one of his knives into the leg of Crab Claws to keep him down then punched him in the face as hard as he could knocking the man out. He pulled out his knife from the guy's leg and began to sheath it when he heard a slow applaud behind him. He turned around to find the girl he saved clapping. Izuku had forgotten about her and kind of didn't really care about her safety in the first place. He just wanted to fight and this guy seemed like it would give him the most thrill. She walked over to him and thanked him for saving her life. Izuku pointed to the passed out guy on the floor next to him. "You should probably call the police about him." Izuku turned and started leaving. "Have a good rest of your night then," he said, sounding almost bored but mostly awkward. "Wait. What's your name, your vigilante name? What do you go by?" "I got to know." Izuku turned around and shrugged. "Don't got one." He turned back around and left. The next day Izuku was walking to school when he came across an article on his phone. New vigilante on the streets. Turns out he had saved a reporter. Thus the Emerald Nightwalker was born. Chapter 6, Say CK. Right now Izuku was trying to learn how to properly, or at least successfully, jump across the rooftops without dying or catching himself with his face. He made sure his new tool belt, he may or may have not have stolen, was fastened around his waist. He backed up, took a running start then jumped. He landed on the roof of the building across and rolled to soften the impact of the landing. Izuku popped up onto his feet and continued to run then jump across to another roof. He continued to run jump land and roll, run jump land and roll. Eventually getting the hang of it he only rolled if the building was too far and he needed to ensure an easier landing. The better he got the quicker he went. At one point he could say he was flying through the air as he flew from rooftop to rooftop. It was such an amazing feeling. To fly as the wind blows through his hair and he almost forgot about everything. It was such a weird feeling that wrapped itself around Izuku, something he's never felt before. Freedom. Yes, that's what he was feeling. Izuku closed his eyes, a small smile formed as he visibly relaxed. Izuku soared through the air and felt free. A scream quickly knocked him out of his trance making him almost completely miss the building he was jumping to. He caught the edge, pulled himself up and over onto the roof then laid there for a second catching his breath. Izuku got up and listened. He heard some scuffling coming from somewhere to his right. He ran to the other edge of the building and looked down the alleyways below. Seeing nothing he jumped to the next building over and looked down the alley again. To no avail, he jumped one more building over. Looking down he saw a man wearing a red scarf standing over a hero. Towel man, he assumed. From the roof, he could see the hero had the look of a towel. Both head and body in the shape of a rolled-up towel. The man with the scarf stood over Towel Man with a katana as the hero cried in pain. Seeing the sword caught his attention and he couldn't help himself from saying, "Stendhal." But when the scarfed man looked up at the sound of his name, Izuku wasn't there. Izuku went to the other side of the building and down the fire escape. He ran around the building to approach the once fight and turned the corner as a knife flew past his face, and his mask fell from one ear. He looked up to see the man who threw the knife pointing a katana straight at him with a stern questioning look. "Are you the one that called my name?" Izuku nodded, "So I was right." The man shook his head, "No, I am no longer the vigilante I once was. I now go by Stain." Stain looked Izuku up and down, "And you must be the new Green Nightwalker." Izuku was pretty sure the news was calling him the Emerald Nightwalker, but Stain got close enough. Stain put his weapon down seeing Izuku as unthreatening. "I expected a child but I didn't expect a 10-year-old, Izuku put a hand to his chest. "I'll have you know, I'm 14. He was a bit offended but it was mostly exaggerated. He is rather short for his age, so it was kind of understandable, but he didn't think he looked as short as a 10-year-old. Still rather young though. Stain started trying to shoo him away. Run along now. You are much too weak for this fight and I am not one for killing children. Can't do that. Izuku readied his knives. I have to stop you or die trying. Stain pointed his sword at the bleeding hero behind him. Why choose to save someone like him, just because he's a hero? Do you know what he's done, how he has abused his power as a hero? Izuku nodded and started saying all that he remembered from what he had either written down in a notebook or seen firsthand. Towel Man. Also known as Mark Shun. Grew up in America but moved during high school to Japan and became a hero shortly after. Quirk, producing towels from anywhere on his body. The towels can be produced in many different textures, such as wet or warm. What many don't know is that while mostly made of towels, his hands and feet aren't, and are one of his biggest weaknesses. Once removing the towels that surround either his hands or feet, it is the best place to strike due to the least amount of padding from his towels and will bleed the most there. Izuku looked over to Towel Man, who had his hand stabbed into the ground by a pair of knives. I didn't ask for his life story, kid. Izuku shook his head. I'm not done. He took a deep breath and then continued. Towel Man is a rescue hero, placing in the top what most who have been saved by him have. The unfortunate fact of finding out is that if he gets hurt too much while trying to rescue you, he will force you to pay him for his need for medical attention. From the smallest scratch to a simple bruise, Izuku sighed as he continued with the worst of it all. Towel Man has been said by the reports of people who were saved by him, he would intentionally harm himself sometimes to make more money out the situation. No one believed those who have stated these reports, believing these people made it up for attention. That's why Towel Man still ranks rather high. Stain was shocked to say the least. While just about lining up with what he knew, it also went a bit beyond that. Such as he had only just discovered while trying to kill him, the weakness of his hands and feet. Then he was confused. If you knew all that, and what an unjust hero he really is. Why are you choosing to try and save him from his inevitable demise? Never said I was. Now Stain was really confused. Then why still fight me? It's supposed to be the right thing to do. To stop those who have done real wrong in the eyes of others. Izuku paused for a bit, then added on, you also just seem like a rather thrilling fight. Izuku ran toward Stain. Stain easily dodged any attempts at slicing or jabbing him with a knife, but was quite surprised to find the kid dodge some of his attacks with also some ease. The fight was getting a little boring because he was holding back still a good amount. Killing a kid wasn't on his agenda for the night, especially one of his vigilante brethren. Stain looked down at Izuku fighting and was taken aback by the bored expression on the boy's face. Did he know he was holding back? That's when he was nicked in the arm, then Izuku's knife sliced Stain's arm again. Izuku took full opportunity of him being distracted for that split second. To cut him as much as he could. It didn't last long and Stain dodged his next swing, ran around him, and cut his arm before liking his blade. Izuku felt his body go limp as he fell to the ground. I think that's a good ending point for today, kid. Gotta say you're pretty interesting. Stain walked over and pulled the knife out of the wall he first threw when Izuku first turned the corner. Walking back over, he placed the knife next to Izuku. I leave that for you as both a gift and reminder. You're quite an interesting kid with a good set of morals. I'll be back, so expect me in the future. He wasn't lying either, Stain had to admit. Every second with this kid got more interesting than the last. Stain walked off, leaving Izuku on the ground paralyzed and the hero to bleed out. Izuku sat there baffled until the quirk eventually wore off. He sat up and started twirling the knife Stain had gifted him around. Why does everyone keep gifting me knives like it was a normal thing? He wasn't complaining though. It was a pretty nice knife. It was 2 in the morning and no one was awake, except for him. He grabbed a bag and began packing, only the essentials. Any of his shirts that he could fit, his uniform, whatever cash he had, some water bottles, and he thought about packing a few snacks, but he'll probably die before he gets this muzzle off. Izuku had left about a month ago and Shinso was stuck all alone again. The stupid note left behind wasn't enough of an explanation for the reason, but he couldn't be happier for his friend. Izuku found the courage to leave and in what Shinso believes was a spit of rage, took his muzzle with him on the way out. But Shinso was also angry at his friend. Izuku left without saying anything to him first, no goodbye, or see you later, or let's meet here on Tuesdays after school to help him with the stupid math he still doesn't get. Izuku just left and didn't think of what that would do to Shinso, who he left behind. They quickly replaced the muzzle on Shinso just a few days after Izuku left and it was one of the worst ones he's gotten yet. Not only is it impossible to take off on his own but it also cuts into him even more than the last. Shinso went a few too many days without eating because they kept forgetting to feed him like normal. At least Izuku would have brought him food. Even if he did sneak out at night to get food from the kitchen it wouldn't matter if he couldn't take the muzzle off in the first place. Shinso finally decided he was done as well and finished packing his bag. The alarms on the house don't get turned off until early in the morning and he didn't know the codes. They were put on after Izuku left to prevent Shinso from doing the same, not realizing he still goes to school. So the next morning when it was time for school he left but never made it to school. He spent his time during the day wandering the streets, walking up to anyone that he crossed and pointed to his muzzle. He would make muffled noises and just keep pointing until they got it and help him out. But that never happened. Everyone would get too weirded out with him, or physically push him away, or be too scared and run. Shinso was starting to really feel the effects of hunger as he felt a bit faint and he couldn't do anything about it. That night he cuddled up next to a dumpster, blanket that he stole from his bed last second wrapped around him. He took one of the water bottles and dumped it over his face. Shinso could taste just a little bit of the water that managed to squeeze through the metal and into his mouth. Shinso only got about 2 hours of sleep the night before because he was just too ready to leave. He felt this night was going to be the same, but now he was in an alleyway next to a dumpster, not a bed. But the night wasn't completely lost when a white cat walked over to him. He reached his hand out and it let him pet it. Shinso grabbed out a bag of goldfish from his bag. He bought them earlier thinking they might be small enough to fit in between the cracks of his muzzle, and put a few on the ground in front of the cat, then the whole bag. "I'm sorry, that's all I have to give you," he thought as he pet the cat as it ate. The cat happily ate them up then cuddled up right next to him. While the cat passed out soon after it was comfortable next to Shinso, he was a different story and stayed up most of the night. He woke up the next day with no memory of actually falling asleep. It was only 3 hours based on the time of day, but it works for him. Shinso got up for his day and walked to a convenience store, the cat following right next to him. He used up the rest of his money buying more water and a small bowl. He walked back to the alleyway where he left his stuff under the dumpster and sat down. The cat sat in front of him and just stared straight up at him. Shinso looked at it and patted its head. He grabbed the bowl and put it in front of the cat and poured some water into it. The cat looked down at the bowl, up at Shinso who nodded, then back at the bowl and began to drink. The alleyway was dark when Shinso and the cat returned from another attempt at trying to get someone to take his muzzle off. He walked in and his vision immediately started to blur. He grabbed for the wall next to him as he started stumbling forward. To no avail, he fell to the ground then just slowly laid his head down. The lack of food and sleep was catching up to him. The cat started circling him meowing loudly and bouncing on top of him. It nudged and licked at his face. Shinso was too weak to move. The cat circled him one last time before nudging its head against his and walking out of the alleyway. Shinso watched it leave him as the cat looked back one last time before leaving. He closed his eyes as he felt a tear escape him. Shinso woke up about an hour later, got himself to sit up and wrapped himself up in his blanket against the wall. He sat looking at the entrance of the alley, vision going in and out from time to time. Then White caught his eye. He slowly opened his arms with the little strength he had. The cat turned the corner and ran up to him. Soon after it jumped into his arms. A man turned the corner. Shinso could tell he was wearing all black and something yellow on his face, which he assumed to be a pair of glasses. The man ran up to him and squatted in front of him, hands on Shinso's shoulders, shaking him a bit. "Kid. Kid. You okay? Speak to me." "Kid," he sounded frantic. Shinso suddenly became alert, coming out of whatever daze he was in. His eyes went wide and he looked at the man in front of him. He went to talk but forgot the muzzle. He looked at the man, inhaled a deep breath, then weakly pointed to his muzzle. He grabbed at it a bit, trying to get his point across, and after taking a few seconds the man finally understood, worked at it, and got the muzzle off. Shinso felt tears of joy, as well as pain, fall as he breathed in the air and could feel a few of his cuts on his face bleed. He searched around him, spotted a water bottle, and chugged it. He then grabbed his bag and searched it for anything. In a very small voice, he looked over to the man and said, "Food." The man stood up, searched his pockets, then pulled out a jelly pouch and handed it to him. Shinso without any hesitation opened the pouch as fast as possible and inhaled it. He looked up to his savior and his eyes went wide. "Eraserhead," he said in a whisper. Eraserhead looked down at Shinso and took off his goggles with an eyebrow. "We can discuss how you know that later. Right now we need to get you home." "And who put the muzzle on you?" Shinso shook his head. "No, home." His voice was barely audible. "Not speaking for weeks did that to you?" Eraserhead squatted back down. "Can you say it again? Where do you live?" Shinso opened his mouth and tried to say it again but couldn't get the words out. He absent-mindedly started raising his hands to sign but started putting them back, realizing. "You know sign language. If you can't speak, use it." So Shinso did. "No, home. I ran away. They're the ones that put the muzzle on me because of my villain quirk," he signed out. Eraserhead was shocked to say the least. He nodded, then stood up. "Can you move?" Shinso grabbed the wall behind him for support and slowly started to rise. He almost fell back down when Eraserhead caught him. He picked up Shinso's stuff and then stood at his side as he held him up for support. They walked out of the alleyway and down the street. "So we can get this sorted out in the morning after you get some food and sleep in you. You're gonna spend the night at my place if that's fine with you." Shinso just signed it, sure, but he was honestly just too tired to freak out about spending the night at his favorite hero's place. As they walked to Eraserhead's place, Shinso constantly looked down, checking to see if the cat was still there. Noticing this, Eraserhead spoke up, "You got a name for her?" "She is the one that led me to you." Shinso looked down at his cat, then back at Eraserhead. Hope, Chapter 7, The Death of a Hero Part 1. Izuku was out patrolling the streets when he saw a big man with his hands on a woman and said woman screaming for help. Izuku looked down from the top of the building, assessing the situation. He debated actually jumping in and fighting the big dude, but it didn't seem all that fun and more of an easy takedown. The man may look physically large and buff, but considering he also had 2 extra eyes, figured he just went to the gym 24/7 and it wasn't because of his quirk. Izuku was leaving. He was, but he made eye contact with the woman. She wasn't screaming anymore, just looking up at him and pleading. She was crying and asking for help as she tried to fight back. Izuku let out a long sigh and jumped, landing on top of the guy. Once free from his grasp, the woman ran. Surprisingly though, the man didn't pass out right away, and he got back up. Not seeing the girl he was blatantly harassing anywhere, the guy got sad. He stomped his way over to the vigilante and Izuku let him pick him up as if he was a cat. He was bored and he knew this fight could be over in less than a minute once he put effort into it. "What are you doing out here, kid?" the man said with a growl. "Aren't you supposed to be being tucked in by mommy waiting for grade school the next day?" Now Izuku was said. He reared his arm back and punched the dude directly in the face. It didn't do as much as Izuku thought it would, but at least he was dropped without much of a fight. Izuku knew his days were too blissful the past few days, and he couldn't quite put his finger on why that was. He was suddenly reminded by this asshat that he had school starting up again in a few days, and the days of Kacchan were quickly approaching. The man in front held his face with one hand and scowled down at Izuku. "You've done it now, brat." He reached for Izuku again, but this time his hand and arm were cut up. Izuku kicked in the man's knee and sent the guy tumbling to the ground. He looked up at Izuku, then saw the hilt of his knife come down on his face as the man was knocked out. Izuku reached into his belt and pulled out a stack of sticky notes and a pen. He stuck it to the forehead of the passed-out man. It just read, "Bruised face, cut up arm, check the knees." Izuku then walked out of the alley in the direction of the girl. Not finding her anywhere close, he just figured it was easier making the call to the police himself than going through the trouble of having to look for her. So he called in on his secure untraceable phone and just set a location, then hung up. The cops were there pretty quick, considering this wasn't the first time he's done this. They read the sticky note, assessed the damage, then Izuku watched as the guy was put in the back of a cop car before leaving. A few days into his third year of middle school, and Izuku was just about done with Kacchan and his lackeys. They never change, it's always, "Shitty Deku this" and "Shitty Deku that." Constantly telling him he can't be a hero. All of Kacchan's followers just mindlessly follow his every move. Although, sometimes they do think for themselves and would beat up Izuku without the presence of Kacchan. It's usually after school if Izuku can't escape them. Kacchan stopped chasing him after school, his senseless beatings only happened during school hours. Which was why it was kind of weird when Izuku was just finishing up an entry about this new hero mount lady when Kacchan stalked over to his desk. You'd think it would finally be beaten enough into your stupid quirkless head by now. Kacchan grabbed his notebook and held it out in front of him. "You can't be a hero. It's never going to happen with your quirkless butt. So what are you doing still writing in these shitty notebooks?" he said with a growl. Kacchan put the notebook in between his hands and activated his quirk. Izuku felt his heart drop a bit. That was the last of its kind, and it was so thoughtlessly destroyed without a second thought. It was almost finished too. Kacchan then walked over to the window and threw the notebook out. He looked out and gave a small chuckle. "Maybe if you take a swan dive off the roof, you'll be lucky enough to be born with a quirk in your next life." Izuku stood up and ran to the window and looked for the notebook, and let out a sigh of relief when he saw it in the koi fish pond. "Give up, you're not going anywhere with this useless dream, Deku." It wasn't said with the usual snarl, but there was still some bite to it. Izuku gripped the window sill until his knuckles turned white, and Kacchan and his lackeys walked out. He wasn't angry per se, just irritated and annoyed. Even after learning to fight and getting the experience under his belt, he still couldn't fight back against Kacchan. He hasn't even tried, and he already knows he won't be able to. All that happens to Izuku when Kacchan wants to beat him is he freezes and instantly gives up. Izuku gathered up his stuff and left to go fish his notebook out of the pond of their school. Izuku was walking the usual way, home, ready to just fall face first into his pile of old clothes and sheets. He was flipping through his notebook, assessing the damage and seeing how much he could fix. Besides just needing to dry off, a lot of the writing looked somewhat visible and could just use a touch-up and trace over. Some pages were unfortunately completely destroyed, and he would have to redo them to the best of his ability. Izuku was so consumed with his notebook that he didn't feel that something was wrong until it was right upon him. Slime began sliding down his throat, and as he grabbed at his mouth trying to pull it out, Izuku found he couldn't grab anything. This slime villain just shushed him and told Izuku to stop struggling and it would all be over soon. The slime just slipped through his fingers and went farther down his throat. Izuku reached behind him and tried grabbing at anything he could. He grabbed at something that wasn't slime and a little bit more squishy, and he knew he hit something important when the slime guy let out a chuckle and said, "Whoa kid, you're gonna poke my eye out at this rate if you do that." Izuku continued to reach behind him trying to grab an eye, but the slime had already shifted so he couldn't touch anything like that again. Izuku fought and struggled as best he could, but he began to suffocate, breathing in more slime than air. He gave up and succumbed to the villain raiding his body. Izuku passed out and didn't feel his body hit the ground after a large gust of wind blew past him. Izuku slowly regained consciousness with a few light hits to the face. Looking at the man waking him up from his much-needed rest, even if he was lying in the street and was just attacked by a villain, he was honestly kind of sad at first. "Thought we lost you there," came the booming voice. After focusing and recognizing the voice as All Might, Izuku shot up and was now thoroughly shocked, then coughed out all the slime in his lungs. He looked around for his notebook until All Might held it out in front of him. "Looking for this? It's rather destroyed, you should probably get a new one." Izuku started flipping through it looking for a blank page. Ready to ask the number 1 hero to sign it, it could probably go for a lot of money, then he landed on the autograph of said hero. Izuku looked up to see All Might stretching his legs and doing squats. He looked over to Izuku and gave him a half salute. "You're looking alright to me, so I better get this guy down to the station." All Might patted the side of his leg on a bottle of the slime villain. "Well, so long." Wait. Izuku wasn't done. He still had so much to say. He may not be Izuku's number 1 anymore, but he still grew up idolizing him. Izuku didn't realize what he did until after he was in the air. As the hero squatted readying himself to jump, Izuku reached, grabbed, then held on for dear life as he was taken to the skies. When All Might did finally notice him, they both landed on the roof of a building. Izuku took a moment to catch his breath before realizing the hero was smoking. Or was that steam coming off of him? Then All Might deflated and Izuku had to act shocked or surprised at the smaller form of the man. Hacking into most of the city's cameras has its perks when it comes to learning a lot of information about anything and anyone, as well as coming across things you least expect. Izuku may have overdone the acting just a bit when All Might was calming him down. "I'm still All Might, this is just my true form." Izuku started to fake calm down a bit, and that's when All Might went on with his speech of secrecy. "You must keep this a secret, the public is not allowed to know about this. I can only spend about 3 hours in my other form, but no one can know." All Might lifted up his shirt to reveal a large sunken wound. "I got seriously hurt in a villain attack many years ago which has done some serious damage on how long I can stay transformed." "Oh yeah, the dude wearing all black that had a crazy cool quirk." Izuku thought for a bit. Most of the fight got taken down from the internet and it takes a lot of digging to find it. All Might was shocked, to say the least. No one was supposed to know about the fight at all. A light bulb almost seemed to go off in Izuku's head, so that's why there aren't as many interviews of you these days. That explains a lot actually. Now All Might was a little confused on why this was where the kid's brain immediately led and what the kid was now muttering about. "Well, I have to get going now, gotta get this guy." All Might felt his empty pockets, opening them and feeling no bottles. SHT. All Might was now sad for letting this kid get in the way of his work, but he tried to calm himself down a bit. The villain was lost, yes, but he was pretty sure he screwed the caps on pretty tight. So now he just has to find the bottles. First, deal with whatever the kid needs. All Might looked at the said kid who was now looking back at him. Instead of that bored expression he was wearing earlier, Izuku's eyes were just a bit wider, and even though he didn't look scared, there was a bit of fear in his eyes after hearing the number 1 hero curse. Then to see the villain missing, he got just a bit more scared. Izuku readied his hands at his sides. Less to fight but more to block. All Might was angry, and after realizing it was because it was his fault the hero lost the villain. Why wouldn't Izuku be scared? Anger makes people act in different ways. Izuku felt phantom pains from old bruises that were long gone from beatings he could never forget. He took a step back just in case and stared at All Might, waiting to see what he did next. "I'm waiting. What is it that made you grab onto me and then made me lose a villain?" All Might had a stern questioning glare as he waited as patiently as he could. But after seeing the kid back up ever so slightly and his hands just a bit raised into a fist, he realized he was scaring him even with Izuku's face just barely showing it. All Might forced himself to calm down. He was scaring a helpless kid. "I'm sorry, that was unhero of me." Getting angry at you for nothing. It was my fault, I should have been paying closer attention. Izuku felt his shoulders relax and dropped his hands, as he continued to stare at his once favorite hero. He thought of what to ask him and tried to pick out the top questions racing through his mind, but after seeing All Might raise one of his eyebrows still waiting for something, Izuku blurted out something he thought he had given up long ago. Can I still be a hero, even without a quirk? All Might paused. No, you can't. It isn't a realistic dream. I'm sorry. All Might pushed himself off from the railing he was leaning against. You have no power in this world. Give up on the dream, it's not worth dying over. All Might started walking to the door as Izuku just stood there unable to move and look up from the ground. If you truly want to help people, pick something more reasonable and achievable like a doctor or a policeman. Yes, All Might was in a rush, but that was still just the undeniable truth, and inspiring the kid would only get him killed. All Might walked out the door to the roof, leaving Izuku alone. The minute he heard the door close, Izuku felt his knees give out and he collapsed to the ground. His eyes were blown wide open and the inside of him hurt, like something finally broke. Like something finally shattered inside of him and the pieces are now scattering. Izuku felt empty. A dream he thought he had moved on from and forgotten was still there, just hanging on, collecting cracks. Until it finally broke. His mom hugged him as they both cried, I'm so sorry Izuku. You're a useless quirkless little SHT. Kacchan burned Izuku's chest as he held him down after Izuku tried to help a kid, stupid Deku, thinking he was a hero. You think you're quirkless but can become a hero, maybe if you take a swan dive off the roof. You'll be lucky enough to be born with a quirk in your next life. Give up on this useless dream, it isn't a realistic dream, you have no power in this world. Izuku didn't realize he had made his way over to the edge of the roof and was standing on the other side of the railing. He tightened his grip on the metal behind him as he looked down at the streets of the city. Then closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Just give up already. Izuku finally let go. Chapter 8. The BRTH of a Villain Part 2. Izuku finally let go. He exhaled his breath and opened his eyes. The streets were still busy and life was still moving. Yet, it didn't feel the same for Izuku. Hearing an explosion, he looked up to see smoke and fire in the distance. Izuku grabbed the railing behind him and took a deep breath. He'll come back, he thought. Just see what's causing the explosion first. He climbed over the railing, collected his backpack, and then walked out the door to the roof. He left the building and walked over to the scene. Arriving at the scene, he stopped behind a crowd of people gathering at the foot of an alleyway. Fires were consuming the buildings surrounding the alley. Izuku couldn't see what was causing such damage because of all the people standing in front of him. Dmn his shorter stature. So, he jumped as high as he could just to get a peek. And that was all he needed. Not seeing a fire escape in the alley of the attack, he ran to the other side of one of the burning buildings, found the fire escape, and climbed it to the roof. Izuku looked down at the slime villain and Kacchan being suffocated, just like how he was before. He then watched as all the heroes just yelled at each other and at the civilians, telling them to stay back. Izuku watched as the heroes did nothing. Kacchan was going to die and the heroes were doing nothing. Izuku was starting to get angry. Izuku couldn't watch Kacchan die that easily, he wasn't allowed to die that easily. Kacchan wasn't allowed to take the easy route out of life like it was nothing. Izuku wasn't going to let it happen either. Izuku reached into a hidden pocket at the very bottom of his bag and pulled out his knives. He wasn't going to let Kacchan die without at least suffering first, plus this slime guy was kind of strong, so he knew the fight was going to be somewhat fun. Izuku stood at the edge of the roof, aimed, then threw one of his knives at an eye of the slime villain. The villain screamed in pain and let go of Kacchan, just enough for him to breathe. The slime then started working faster and trying to make its way into the body of Kacchan as the villain cried from the eye without the knife. Izuku saw the only working eye of the villain look straight at him. The slime started to rise towards Izuku and that's when he jumped. Izuku dug another knife into the other eye. As the villain screamed in agony, he didn't realize he was letting go of Kacchan, so the heroes took the opportunity and started rushing in to grab Kacchan. The slime now was beginning to surround Izuku as he hung from the knife. He just took out his knife from the eye and stabbed it back in, which caused the villain to scream more and the slime to back off. Izuku didn't stop though, he removed the weapon only to stick it back into the eye again and again. Each time the smile Izuku didn't realize was forming on his face grew bigger with each piercing. The villain slowly lowered Izuku to the ground, pleading for him to stop. Izuku's feet touched the ground and Izuku used the secure footing to jump and grab the knife in the other eye and do the same thing. As he continued to move the knife into the eyes, the villain deflated and no longer was holding its form upward. The slime gradually turned to liquid as it spread across the ground. Suddenly Izuku was pulled away. The slime villain took the opportunity to try to get away. It moved across the ground as if crawling, trying to drag its slime as far away from Izuku as possible. The villain didn't get very far before being captured and taken into custody. The fires started being put out and those who needed healing were being treated. Kacchan was surrounded by people asking him questions and healing him as he sat on the back of an ambulance. The thrill of everything started to dissipate along with the crowd, and Izuku was starting to lose the high he was feeling as his smile began to fade away. He was about to leave but was quickly surrounded by a bunch of heroes, each having a different amount of anger than the other. Then they all started yelling. "Are you stupid, kid? What is wrong with you? Are you injured? Do your parents know what you did? Do they know where you are? Don't be so reckless. Leave dealing with villains for the professionals. You're lucky you didn't get hurt. That could have ended way worse and we would have had to go in and saved your butt for recklessly jumping in like you did. Don't do that again, you won't be so lucky next time." They just continued to scold him, each taking a turn to yell at him, and this just going in an endless circle. Then maybe you should have stepped in and done your jobs as the professionals, instead of standing on the sidelines not doing SHT. Izuku snapped in the middle of one of them yelling at him. He was still somewhat sad at them for letting Kacchan almost die before he was allowed. This shut all the heroes up and they just stared at him. There was nothing we could do. Our quirks weren't suited for this type of villain. That still doesn't mean you recklessly jump in like you did, because you will just create bigger problems, or worse, die. One of the heroes said, almost as if Izuku was dumb. "I noticed. None of you could think of anything to do, and if I didn't step in you would have had a dead kid on your hands. All because your stupid quirks weren't suited for this type of villain." Izuku yelled back. "I did your job for you using nothing but 2 blades. Izuku spat out, waving the knives in their faces as he made eye contact with each one. All while they looked down on him. They all just stared at him until one of the heroes eventually brought him over to get checked out for any injuries. Izuku was fine and didn't need any medical attention, he just wanted to get home at this point. The hero taking him to get looked at turned around for a second to say something to one of his fellow heroes, so Izuku took the opportunity and left. As he sneaked away, he listened to the hero start to freak out over where he went. Izuku went back up to the roof to grab his stuff, then started dragging his feet home. As the high of the fight wore off and he started to calm down, exhaustion from the day finally set in. His face started to relax back into its usual impassive look when he heard footsteps running up behind him. Izuku just continued to walk. He didn't turn around, already knowing who it was. "You're a weak quirkless failure and I didn't ask for your help, Deku." Kacchan yelled as Izuku put his hands in his pockets and continued to walk. "You think you can just look down on me now just because you're useless but thinks you saved me." Izuku stopped. "I didn't save you." "What did you say, nerd? Speak up." Izuku turned around and looked Kacchan straight in the eyes. "I didn't save you, Kacchan," he said in a bored tone. His eyes looked dead. "What do you mean you didn't save me?" Kacchan chuckled a bit but still looked furious. "You were trying to be a hero again and almost got everyone killed with your recklessness." He yelled. "I wasn't trying to save you. It means just like how it sounds. Izuku said with a monotone voice. He was too tired for this and Kacchan was starting to work him up again. Then why did you jump in and almost get yourself killed trying to save someone who didn't ask for help from a nobody like you? Kacchan shouted. Izuku shrugged his shoulders. He couldn't really tell Kacchan it was because he wasn't allowed to die yet. Especially without much suffering beforehand. You were going to die, doesn't mean I was trying to save you. Izuku just wanted to fall asleep, and yet every time Kacchan talked he got just a little bit more irritated. Izuku himself though was done with the conversation and so started walking away. I owe you nothing. You're never going to become a hero. You never will no matter how much you try. All you are is quirkless failure that's worth nothing more than the dirt we walk on. Give up on your worthless dream because it's never going to happen. Deku, you will never be a hero. Kacchan screamed at the top of his lungs. Something snapped within Izuku. He turned around and started yelling back. I already know I can't become a hero, Kacchan. I haven't wanted to be a hero after the first few beatings from you and everyone else. I gave up on that dream years ago and yet you had to make sure it was really gone every single day of my worthless life. You had to make sure I knew how useless I was, how I was worth nothing more than the dirt you walk on no matter how much I tried. You had to make sure I knew that I was a failure because I was quirkless. Izuku paused. Kacchan couldn't find any words to say as he stared speechless at Izuku. Izuku turned ready to walk away when he looked straight into Kacchan's eyes. You know, I should have taken your advice after all, Katsuki. I should have jumped. Izuku walked away, cutting whatever small string he still had attached to Bakugo. Izuku went home, fell into his pile of old clothes and sheets, then went right to sleep. Izuku woke up the next day still in his school uniform. He opened the door to his storage container, quite surprised he closed it in the first place, considering how tired he was, and looked at the setting sun. That couldn't be right, did he really only sleep an hour? He walked back inside, checked his phone and saw that he had missed his morning alarm for school. He had slept a whole day. He must have really gotten worked up yesterday, to cause him to sleep 24 hours. It was the most sleep he's gotten in the past few weeks though, so he wasn't much complaining. An idea suddenly struck his mind as he remembered the fight against the slime villain the day before. Izuku put on his black hoodie instead of green and the bottom half of his vigilante suit. He was now wearing all black, the only thing standing out was his green hair. He tied it back and put his knives in his belt, then hid them underneath the hoodie. Izuku made his way to a party store or some store that sold masks. He disabled any security cameras in or around the store, walked and grabbed a white mask with two black eyes and a large wide black smile. No one noticed him walk in and no one noticed him walk out. Izuku put on the mask as the sun finally set. It covered his entire face and was a little hard to see out of at first, but the longer he wore it the easier it got. Izuku wandered the streets just waiting for someone to stop him because the mask did make him look rather suspicious, especially at this time of night. He turned down an alleyway and felt eyes on him. He continued to walk as he tried to assess who it was without drawing attention. Izuku turned around but saw no one. He looked the alley up and down, left to right, but didn't see anyone. There was no one standing in front of him, but he could swear he still felt someone staring at him as if they were standing right there. Then it clicked. Izuku put his right into a fist and pressed to his abdomen, and did the same with his left and but pressed at his back, then bowed. Pleased to make your acquaintance, underground hero Shadow. The alley was silent and no one moved. It almost seemed like Izuku was talking to air. I know you're there, I can feel your eyes on me. Still, nothing but the eyes never left him. Come on, I know you're still here hiding. Izuku closed his eyes and put his head down, trying to focus and pinpoint where the feeling was coming from. After feeling where the eyes were, he looked directly into them but still didn't actually see them. Izuku put his hands up in surrender. Come out already, I know where you are anyways, so you're not even hiding at this point. Izuku continued to stare into the eyes that were looking back at him, even if he couldn't see them. Here, I'll let you in on a little secret of mine if it makes you feel safer. I have no quirk. I'm quirkless. Izuku paused, still looking at the eyes. He lifted his shoe. I'll show the toe if you really want proof. Then why are you out so late? The eyes spoke with a deep voice, but no one was seen. Wanted to test something. Izuku said truthfully. Did you test it? Shadow's voice was low and deep, but also genuinely curious. Nah. I was actually on my way home when I think I took a wrong turn. You shouldn't be out this late for such a reason. Do you need help getting back? Yeah, if you could. My mom must be worried sick. Izuku said, sounding as worried as he could. What if she already called the cops, or she thinks I'm dead, or... Izuku felt a hand on his shoulder and smiled underneath his mask. Don't worry, kid, I'll get you home safe and sound in no time. In front of Izuku was a silhouette of a person staring down at him. How long have you been out for? Izuku looked up at the silhouette. It's only been a couple of hours since I left. Thanks for helping me out. No problem at all, kid. How old are you anyway? 14, why? That is much too young for a kid like you to be wandering the streets this late at night. Like me. Izuku understood what he meant, but he tried to act like the innocent kid this hero thought he was. Quirkless and all, if what you said was true. How could your parents be so irresponsible and let their quirkless son out of their sights? What? Izuku was now starting to get sad. You could be killed at any second because you have nothing protecting you. Are you all right? No scrapes or bruises. Shadow started to look Izuku up and down as if he was glass. I'm all good, don't worry. Izuku pushed the hero off a bit because he was starting to get a bit too close and may see or feel his tool belt. Then let's get you home, kid. They both started to walk out and Shadow suddenly realized something. Hey kid, how'd you know it was me standing there? Shadow looked to his side to see Izuku not there walking with him. Shadow stopped and looked back. Izuku was standing in place staring at him and smiling again under the mask. The same way I know that you are one of the top-rated underground heroes. And that your real name is Shin Kuroyo. The same way I know that your quirk is called Shadow and you can create shadows, blending into the back of anything. It's the reason your body is a silhouette because you are basically a shadow as well. Izuku said as if reciting the wiki page and not his own observations from his notebook. Man kid, you must really like me. To research and remember that much. Well, it's real late and your parents must be worried sick. But Izuku didn't move and his smile grew just a bit wider under the mask. It's also the same way I know you have a son named Shirhai, who wants to be a hero just like his dad. Was it UA that he was aiming to get into next year? It's also how I know your wife died when he was still young. Quite sad losing his mother in such a horrific way. The hero started to create a shadow around him and move closer to the wall as Izuku continued to talk. It's also how. Izuku threw a knife at Shadow and heard the hero cry out in pain as he started to become visible again. I know you're weak to too much pain and too much bleeding can make you unable to use your quirk. The hero tried to stop the bleeding around the knife in his abdomen without taking out the blade itself. Shadow fell back against the wall and slumped down to the ground. He looked up at Izuku as he tried to turn his quirk back on. When it wasn't working, the hero tried to push Izuku back as he got closer to him. Izuku pulled the knife out, then examined it as the hero tried to crawl away. Izuku walked over to the escaping hero and stabbed the knife into his back, smiling just as wide as the smile on his mask. And you shall bleed just like all the rest as well. Izuku stabbed the knife into the hero's back once again. You know it is such a shame that that poor son of yours will lose his father in such a horrific way as well. Izuku stabbed the knife into the hero's again, smile still on his face. Maybe it will give your son more motivation and drive. The whole, must avenge my parents, thing. Shadow pleaded for Izuku to stop, but that just made Izuku chuckle and stab the hero again. As the hero's breath started to get quieter and quieter, and the pleading was dying down, he very faintly spoke, "I thought, you said you were quirkless." Izuku smiled so wide that his cheeks hurt. "I am." Izuku stabbed the hero one last time. The hero gave his last breath and succumbed to his injuries. "Turns out I did end up testing that theory," Izuku said as he cleaned his knives. Izuku went to school the next day. For the first time since he had been diagnosed quirkless, he walked into school happier than ever. He was still wearing his blank stare, but he wasn't gloomy or dragging his feet. He felt good. Izuku walked into the classroom, and while everyone didn't seem to notice or care, one did. Izuku made eye contact with Bakugo as he watched the blonde visibly relax at his presence. Holy SHT, he thought Izuku had actually done it, jumped. Izuku smiled for a split second because he just couldn't contain the glee within himself. Chapter 9, Rising from the dirt like a growing vegetable. Izuku was walking out of the store after picking up his custom-made suits. Being short sometimes had its perks, but this was not one of them. Custom-mades were not cheap. He walked back to his home and tried them on, making sure there weren't any mistakes made. Each was relatively the same with just a few minor details. Each suit, jacket or blazer he got was black, with a pair of matching black pants. He had a few different colored dress shirts. His favorites were the dark green or dark red. But out of everything, his favorite suit altogether was the one that was all black, dress shirt, pants, blazer, except for the inside of the blazer was a dark red with roses. Along with a few different types of hats, to help in covering his hair, he had also just got a few plain black ties. He doubted he would actually wear them, because of the whole no dad thing growing up. He decided to just go plain white and black today. Izuku looked at a list with names both crossed out and yet to be touched. Some of the names had little notes on the side of them, like what their quirk was or what they did for a job. Most of the names were of heroes, usually of lower ranking, but still well known. Izuku grabbed his belt of equipment, a fedora hat, and his new and improved mask. It still was the same smiling face, but instead of it looking like it was from the store down the street, it now was made of a stronger material instead of plastic. It had a leather strap that held the mask to his face. And tech built into it, which included but was not limited to, a voice changer that made his voice sound deeper than it actually was. He looked down at the next name to be crossed out on the list, checked his phone to see if half the money was already transferred to his account, then left for the location he knew the hero would be. After taking a picture. The hero could make and manipulate glass but did not have very good hand-to-hand combat skills, so Izuku only had to get close enough and the game was over for the hero. Izuku adjusted and dusted off his outfit, then picked up his hat from the ground, which had fallen off during the fight. He walked away without a scrape or bruise on him. Izuku pulled out his phone and contacted the person who had hired him. He sent them a picture of the body and a message that said, "The rest of the money sent over by the end of the week." Izuku walked home, staying mostly in the shadows to avoid any suspicion, changed into something more comfortable, then collapsed into his pile and fell asleep. Izuku walked into his class the next day and as normal watched Bakugo make eye contact with him as he entered the room, then just as quickly look away. Bakugo had started a habit without realizing it with Izuku. Every time Izuku would walk into the room in the morning, Bakugo would look at Izuku, then look away, then basically ignore him, for the most part, the rest of the day. Besides a few comments here and there, Bakugo himself had stopped bullying him completely. The people that hung around him were a different story. They still used him as a punching bag any chance they got. He didn't always just stand there but would sometimes get just one hit in before having to put back up the act of being the weak, quirkless Deku, but now he knew how to take a punch and block one. Bakugo was finally starting to feel the guilt of his actions and Izuku knew that. He was so afraid that Izuku was just going to go home that day and decide to end it just like that. That fear made him look and watch and make sure he saw Izuku walk in every morning. Izuku had caught on to this pretty much right away and found it fun to mess with him some days. Like waiting a few seconds after the bell rings to walk in, scoldings from teachers and threats to call home didn't much have an effect anymore. The look on Bakugu's face when he eventually walked in made Izuku laugh just a little every time. Or the days Izuku would miss because he was up all night planning or performing his next murder, so he either didn't sleep or just didn't hear his alarm go off. Missing school for a day or two didn't matter much to Izuku, but it was the opposite for Bakugu. The blonde didn't know if he should start searching for a body or wait to watch it on the news. The look of sheer relief Bakugu would show, when Izuku walked in, before switching immediately to his usual scowl, almost were the highlights of Izuku's day. But while these little moments made him smile or laugh on the inside, they were only that, moments. Izuku didn't like it. Interesting to find out that after all this time Kacchan might actually be able to change, but he wasn't allowed to change into someone who is suddenly guilty. Bakugu wasn't allowed to just now feel the guilt for all he's done. Bakugu wasn't allowed to worry and hope Izuku walked into class the next day. He didn't deserve such a luxury. School had just gotten out and Izuku finished outrunning his bullies. He could easily beat them up or even kill them just for the fun of it, but he didn't feel like causing the unnecessary trouble for himself. He was walking home and checking his phone. The guy who had hired him to murder Mr. Glassman had finally transferred the rest of the money over. He looked at his account and realized that he had quite a lot saved up. Then a thought went off in his head. I can go back for Toshi. Izuku could afford to give Shinso a place to live outside of that house. He could give him anything now. Izuku knocked the top of his head with his fist. Why was he just now thinking of this? Why did it take this long? Shinso was struggling and Izuku had just left him there to bear it alone for too long. Izuku was going to get him out of that house. Izuku started the next day trying to get his friend back. He went to his school and waited outside the gate right as the school was ending for the day. Izuku had skipped school just so he could get here on time. As kids either the same age or younger than him started pouring out of the gate, he waited and looked for a puff of purple hair to walk by. But it never happened. It had gotten dark and Izuku was still there waiting, but he never saw him. He checked the time and it was almost they weren't allowed to stay out anywhere near this late. So that meant Shinso either skipped or didn't leave the house, or worse, Izuku shook his head. He couldn't allow himself to think like that. Izuku came back the next day and waited just as he had the day before. He waited as everyone walked by and looked at him. Waited for his friend. But again he didn't see him. So Izuku came back the next day and the day after that, and the day after that, and the day after that, but no Toshi. He sat outside his school for a whole week. Not once did he see his friend. Izuku knew he had the right school, so why wasn't he here? Izuku was sitting on the ground scrolling through the news on his phone when everyone started walking out of the school. He was tired and bored, but today could be the day. Izuku was scrolling through an article and occasionally looking up, watching to see if he spotted the purple hair of his friend. He looked back down at his phone when a group of girls walked up to him. He paid them no mind and just continued to scroll, then look up and search for a few seconds, then look back down at his phone. They started whispering among themselves. How long has he been here? Who is he? He's a middle schooler like us if the uniform is anything to go by. Who is he waiting for? Is he waiting on a girlfriend? One time I left school super late because of my club and he was still here. Oh yeah, it was super dark out too. Is it a teacher maybe? Could be. Whoever it is, they either get out super late or just haven't shown up yet. Izuku listened but just didn't care. A group of guys walked up as the girls continued to whisper to each other like Izuku couldn't hear them. This dude is still here. One of the boys said. What has it been, like a week and a half? Another guy added on. Izuku looked at the date on his phone. Guess it has. Not showing up to school for this long probably has Bakugu freaking out right now. Izuku chuckled a bit at that. He continued to search the crowd and scroll through his phone when he heard one of the guys mention something about a villain's quirk. Izuku shot his head up at the group gathered next to him. What did you say about a villain's quirk? The group all stopped their chattering and looked down at Izuku. What? One of the boys said. You mentioned someone with a villain's quirk. Who? Some kid in our class. Why you wanna know? Izuku was up and on his feet and in the boy's face. What do they look like, their name? The group took a few steps back. Purple hair, bored look, bags under his eyes. His name was something like Shinsai, Shindo, Shinso. Izuku said, little hope in his voice. Yeah. Shinso. Do you know where he is? Nah, haven't seen him in weeks dude. Izuku felt his heart stop for a second. Why wasn't Shinso showing up for school? What happened to him? Think he finally left, took him long enough. The last part was more of a mumble but Izuku heard it loud and clear. Izuku didn't realize he had punched the boy in the face until there was a fist being swung at his own face. Izuku easily dodged it and walked away. Someone, he assumed one of the other boys, came running up behind him yelling and throwing another punch. Izuku just stepped aside as the momentum of the punch carried the boy forward. Izuku stepped behind the kid and kicked his back. The kid fell to the ground and Izuku just walked around him. A few more kids came up behind him trying to pick a fight, but not knowing who their opponent was, were dealt with like they were nothing. Izuku makes money killing pro heroes, a few middle school boys are nothing. Izuku went home, packed his school bag with a change of clothes, his notebook, and his knives, then closed the storage container behind him. He never thought he would return to that place, but he just wanted to get his friend back. He knocked on the door to his foster house. A few seconds later the door clicked then opened. Sir answered the door and stared down at him. Brat. Izuku tried to look as sorry as possible. I'm sorry I left. I realized I was wrong. Can I come back? Izuku said quickly as he stared at the ground. He slowly looked up to see a smile forming across the man's face. Sir liked his lips and Izuku felt a chill go through his spine. Sir stepped aside and let Izuku in. Izuku felt his eyes on him. Room is in the same place, all the same rules apply. Izuku started to walk to his old room ready to see Shinso again. He was surprised he didn't get yelled at or beat or brat, he heard Sir say behind him. Izuku froze. He slowly turned around, but when he did Izuku got a boot to the stomach. It knocked the wind out of him and sent him flying backward onto the ground. Who do you think you are leaving like that? And leaving a note. Sir started to laugh. You think you're quirkless but can threaten anyone. That's hilarious. Izuku looked up at Sir as he held his stomach on the floor trying to breathe. Sir walked over to Izuku and kicked him in the stomach just as he was starting to breathe regularly again. I'm quite surprised you survived as long as you did, but I knew you would come back. Sir bent down, went to grab his leg, but Izuku curled them in and started to scoot back ever so slightly. This caused Sir to slap him. Man walked in just then and looked at Izuku letting out a small snort. You're back. Shocked you survived. Wish you hadn't come back though. We were getting the checks just fine without you. She walked into the kitchen. Sir stood up and just shooed Izuku off with his hand. Izuku got up and walked down the hallway to his room. He stood in front of the door trying to rehearse an apology for Shinso. He took a deep breath, grabbed the doorknob, and opened it. Izuku looked at the bed, but no one was there. Shinso wasn't there. Izuku sat on his old bed and stared at the old bed of his friend. He wasn't there. Why wasn't he there? Shinso was gone and he had no clue where he had disappeared to. The door opened a few minutes later and Sir peeked in. He looked at Izuku staring at the bed and let out a chuckle. Your friend left a month after you did. Your little threat didn't work either, we got him a new muzzle right away. Way better than the last two. That thing was solid and took 2 people to take it off. Considering he didn't leave it behind and couldn't take it off without help, he probably still has it on. Izuku's heart dropped. They hardly fed him before he was there, and if he couldn't take off his muzzle, how was he eating? That means that before Shinso had left he already was malnourished. He can't talk with the muzzle on, so how was he supposed to ask people to take it off? People were afraid of him at school, so they wouldn't take off the muzzle for him, and with the muzzle on, people that didn't even know him would probably be afraid of him as well. Shinso would never be able to take off the muzzle without outside help, and yet he wouldn't be able to get said help because people are too afraid of him. Izuku started to hyperventilate. He was dead. Shinso was dead. His only friend was dead, and there was nothing he did to prevent it. Why did he have to be such a coward and run away without even thinking of him? Why hadn't he taken him with him? He thought he had finally gotten stronger, but he was wrong. He had let the one person he had left die. He was just as weak and quirkless as ever. His mom was dead because of him, and now Shinso as well. Why couldn't he ever do anything right when it came to keeping the only good people in his life alive? Izuku hadn't realized he was mumbling under his breath as he zoned out looking at Shinso's bed. He felt something touch his leg, and he suddenly came out of his thoughts and looked down at a hand. Sir was sitting on the bed right next to him, rubbing his leg and staring at him. He felt something cold touch his back and begin to make its way around to his stomach. Izuku tried to keep from zoning out, but couldn't help it, as he looked at the bed across from him. Izuku walked through the door to the room and fell against the door right as he closed it, mumbling, "I somehow managed to outrun everyone today." Shinso looked up from the papers on his bed, muzzle now off, and looked at Izuku as if a god had just entered his room. He tapped the bed, getting Izuku's attention. Izuku walked over and sat down. "I'm so glad you're finally here because I have no clue what I'm doing," Shinso signed. Just in case ma'am was walking around near the door, Izuku looked down at what he was doing, saw the problem, then immediately got to work explaining how to do it. By the time the worksheet was done, Shinso was a pro and Izuku was being thanked profusely. "Wait, so you're saying you, accidentally, slipped right as the guy punched you," Shinso whispered as he tried to hold back his laughter. "And because you slipped, the dude punched the wall you were leaning against?" "Yeah, I think he broke his wrist or something." They both burst out laughing, then quickly covered their mouths. Shinso put his face in his pillow as he continued to laugh as hard as possible. They are probably going to get a call about this, but the beating will be worth it this time. The look on that kid's face was hilarious. They both laughed so hard they tired themselves out and fell asleep. "Honestly, Izuku, you're so much cooler than any quirk I could think of. I wish I can be as strong as you someday," Shinso said before falling asleep for the night. Maybe if he didn't have that villain's quirk, what? Izuku focused back into reality. He felt an arm wrapped around his back and looked down to two hands on his chest. Izuku slowly reached under his pillow. The hands moved up and down before starting to make their way down. "You're lucky he had that muzzle on, because he would have easily taken advantage of your weak." Izuku grabbed the handle of one of his knives under the pillow and stabbed it into one of the arms on Sir. He quickly pulled away from Izuku, but before he could even start to cry in pain, Izuku drove another knife into Sir's throat. Izuku got up, leaving Sir wriggling in agony on the floor with the two blades still in him. Izuku walked into the living room where Ma'am was sitting on the couch watching TV. He came up behind her and put a knife to her throat. "Get up," Izuku said with a flat tone. She didn't move. She started to shake a bit, but a small chuckle escaped her mouth. Izuku plunged the knife into her right shoulder. She let out a yelp of pain, and Izuku could feel the tears running down her cheeks as he covered her mouth. "Shoo! I said get up," his voice raised a bit. She did as commanded. He walked into the kitchen and grabbed the block of knives, sleeves pulled over his hands. As they walked back to his room, she tried to grab one of the kitchen knives from the block he was holding. The tips of her fingers touched one of the handles, but Izuku just smacked her hand out of the way and hit the knife still in her shoulder, causing her to cry in pain once more. She opened the door to his room to see Sir still wriggling on the floor as he held his throat, then Izuku pushed Ma'am inside. He closed the door behind himself and placed the block of knives in between him and Sir. Izuku pushed Ma'am against the door with a stern, "Don't move." She cried and pleaded for him to stop and let her go. "I didn't do anything to you. I never hit you and I never hit your friend either. It was him, all him," she would say as she pointed to Sir behind him. She then stopped and a smile began to grow on her face. Izuku stepped to the side right as a knife came moving at him from behind, and then watched as it went right into Ma'am. She looked down at the knife now buried in her stomach and then up at her husband. Her knees buckled under her and she collapsed to the floor. "No. No, no, no." Izuku heard Sir gurgle and cry as he watched the life leave his wife's eyes. Sir turned around to face Izuku and was ready to dive for another knife but was too slow. Holding it by the blade, Izuku threw one of the kitchen knives. Sir looked down to a knife in his chest then looked up at Izuku standing some distance away. Izuku watched as Sir fell to the floor and onto his side as the last of his life left his eyes. Izuku left the room grabbing the doorknob with his sleeve. He walked back in with a few tissues from the bathroom. He removed his knives from both Sir and Ma'am and replaced them with a kitchen knife, which he grabbed using the tissues. He wiped off his knives and put them back in his bag. He stepped around the bodies and out the door of the room. Looking at Shinso's bed one last time before walking down the hall to the bathroom. He flushed the tissues down the toilet then left the house. As he walked home, he still felt the anger inside of him from when he was killing Sir and Ma'am. He wished he had killed them in more of a way they deserved but he couldn't risk their deaths possibly leading back to him. It was dark when Izuku got home, so he threw his bag to the floor and put on his vigilante outfit. He wanted to kill something or someone but didn't want to slip and end up making a mistake due to his emotions being in the state they were. He rushed out and ran across town then up a fire escape and onto a roof. He was listening trying to hear for someone he could punch. He jumped over to the next roof and then to the next. Hearing nothing he continued to jump. As Izuku flew from rooftop to rooftop he hadn't realized when he had stopped trying to listen for someone to beat, and instead was just soaring. Izuku let himself go as he jumped. The feeling of freedom was back. Shinso should be the one feeling this, he thought. Izuku landed, ran, and jumped. He closed his eyes and was in the air as he felt the warm tears slowly spill down his face. Izuku opened his eyes to land but missed his footing. He tried to grab the ledge but slipped and began to fall backward. Nothing has changed, he thought. Izuku was still as weak as ever. Couldn't even catch himself from falling. At least now he'll get to see his mom again and get to apologize to Shinso for leaving him behind. He closed his eyes once again accepting death. But death never came. Izuku felt something wrap around his abdomen catching him in time. Izuku annoyingly looked at the cloth rope that had saved him then immediately tried to get it off. The cloth rope wrapped around Izuku tighter and started pulling him up. Chapter 10, Nice to meet you. The cloth rope wrapped itself around Izuku even tighter as he continued to fight it more and more. The one time Izuku wasn't asking for a hand, someone just had to reach out and give him one. With both of his arms pinned to his sides, there wasn't much he could do besides just wiggle around and try to free himself. Izuku fought and struggled to try to just free at least a hand so he could grab one of his knives from his tool belt, but to no avail. He continued to struggle and was almost at the top when he finally freed one of his arms. Izuku quickly reached down, grabbed a knife from his waist and began cutting away. He cut the last bit of the rope left and immediately felt himself begin to fall again. Izuku closed his eyes ready to meet his mom and friend. But that too was short-lived. Izuku felt something grab onto the front of his hoodie. Izuku let out a deep sigh. Why couldn't he just die in peace? He started squirming around some more. Kid. Stop struggling. I can't pull you up if you keep moving like that. Came a deep raspy voice. That's the point, Izuku yelled, sounding done as he threw his arms out behind him. Izuku finally opened his eyes and looked at the man trying to pull him up. Wearing all black, long hair, yellow goggles, and a scarf he knew he had recognized. Izuku felt his body go limp as he gave up. "Damn it, why'd it have to be you of all people?" Izuku cried out. He felt his body get pulled over the ledge of the roof. "What's that supposed to mean?" Eraserhead said, sounding a bit offended. "I find out my friend is dead. Then I slip, causing me to fall, and at the moment decide, hey F it, this is how I go out. I didn't expect to be saved by the one guy we both spent nights talking about and idolizing." Izuku let out a sigh and threw his head back before leaning back on his hands and looking at Eraserhead. "So you can clearly see my predicament here." Eraserhead lifted one of his eyebrows as he looked at the kid questioningly. How did he and apparently his friend know of him? The bigger question though was, who was this kid and did he seem familiar? "Wait, you're that Green Nightwalker vigilante I've been hearing about." "Close enough. I'm pretty sure the press is calling me the Emerald Nightwalker." "But yeah, that's me, nice to meet ya," Izuku said, sounding bored. Which was the complete opposite of what he thought he would sound like meeting his favorite hero for the first time. Izuku held a loose hand out as if to shake, but before the hero could even touch him he pulled it back in and made sure his mask and beanie were still on. Izuku stood up and picked up the knife he had used earlier, which was just laying on the floor. "Now if you'll excuse me," Izuku backed up near the edge of the roof. "I'd much rather get back to what I was doing." He spread his arms out and leaned back. "Oh, no you don't," Eraserhead said as he quickly took hold of the front of Izuku's hoodie. Izuku looked down at the hand before grabbing at it and trying to get it off. "Come on man." But the hand never let go and Izuku couldn't get it off. "Can't let you die." "Sorry kid." Izuku let out a sigh and walked forward and away from the edge. Izuku laid down and put his arms and legs out. "You know I don't like you very much right now." Izuku stared up at the night sky. "I know," Eraserhead said tiredly as he sat down next to him. "But one day you might thank me for today." "You better hope so." Izuku let out a sigh. "It should be him meeting you, not me," Izuku mumbled under his breath as he felt tears start to prick at his eyes. He let them run down the side of his face for a little bit before sniffing and wiping them away with his sleeve. "It takes time," Eraserhead quietly spoke. He leaned back on his hands and stared up at the stars. "Are you coming from experience, or are you just trying to say something you think I want to hear so I don't go jumping off another roof the minute I leave your sight?" "Experience." Izuku looked over at Eraserhead for a second, watching him twiddle his thumbs a bit as he stared at the sky. Izuku heard a sad tone escape from the hero as he hesitated to speak. "High school. Villain attack from out of nowhere. Are they ever not from out of nowhere?" Izuku was now sitting up and had his legs crossed in front of him. His head rested on his hand as he listened. Eraserhead looked at him with a scowl for being interrupted before continuing. "The point is, I lost one of my closest friends that day and it took a lot of time for me to move on." Eraserhead paused as he thought about his past, then a faint smile formed on his lips, before quickly vanishing. "Luckily, I was surrounded by people that cared. It's thanks to them that I am both alive and where I am now." Izuku let out a small chuckle, but that just made the dam burst and a laugh sounding like that of a maniac escaped him. The hero furrowed his eyebrows. "Sorry," Izuku said, wiping at the wetness forming in his eyes. "I'm not laughing at you and your sob story." He tried to stop his laughing but it just turned into crying. "But it's just that," Izuku tried to get out. Tears started to run down his face as he thought of Shinso again, and every time he looked up at Eraserhead it just made it worse. Shinso was the one that should be here right now. He's the one that deserves to meet his favorite hero, not him. Izuku felt the hand of Eraserhead on his shoulder but immediately slapped it away. Izuku could feel anger rising inside of him. He looked at Eraserhead as he cried out, "But that's the difference between you and me. Not only did I lose a close friend, but he was also the only person left." Eraserhead put his hands up in front of him. "Kid, calm down. I didn't mean to get you worked up." "Sorry. Are you okay?" Take a deep breath. Kid. Eraserhead just started telling him to take deep breaths, and tried walking him through steps of calming him down as Izuku continued to cry. Eventually, Izuku started listening to what the hero was saying and the tears stopped flowing. Eraserhead had his hands hovering just above his shoulders without touching him until pulling them away. You good now, kid? Izuku just nodded. Eraserhead put a hand behind his neck as a frown formed. You sure there's no one? There's gotta be someone. Maybe, you just don't realize it, but they're out there. Let me think about it. Izuku looked like he was in thought but then turned to the hero with a cheeky grin as if he wasn't just bawling his eyes out. Nope. Izuku paused for a second before looking like a light bulb went off in his head. Oh wait, there is one. My school bully, though he doesn't do much bullying these days, Izuku said, mumbling the last part. He started laughing again. He told me to kill myself a few weeks ago, and when I saw his face after not showing up the next day at school, let me just say, Izuku stretched out his arms in front of him and made a rainbow with his hands. Highlight of my day. Now I just like to mess with him because he feels super guilty. Izuku let out a sigh, but yeah, other than that no one. Eraserhead let out a long sigh and pinched the bridge of his nose. What had he gotten himself into? Izuku stood up and stretched. Kid. What? It was a good talk and we each learned a bit about each other, but I'm tired and have school tomorrow. It's been about a week and a half since I last showed up, so I'm kind of curious about the face I'm going to get from him this time. Did this kid really think he was dumb and was just going to let him leave just like that? You really think I'm just going to let you run off? Izuku grinned. Of course not, but I just realized I have something to do and I'm really hoping this doesn't take long. Wah! Izuku took off running and jumped to the next roof. Eraserhead immediately started running after him. The hero was quickly gaining on him, but as Eraserhead went to jump and grab him as they both jumped to the next roof, Izuku dropped and landed on the fire escape. Izuku was quickly descending as Eraserhead raced to catch him. Izuku got to the bottom, ran out of the alleyway, and took a sharp right. He ran down the street before turning into another alley and ducked behind a trash can. Izuku watched as Eraserhead ran past the alley, continuing down the street. He was lucky this time around that Eraserhead didn't have his capture weapon readily available, or this would have been done the moment he started running. Izuku sat there for a few more minutes before slipping out of the alley and walking to his next destination. He tried to stay closer to the shadows as best as possible. Izuku arrived at the cemetery and pushed the metal bars open before walking inside. He walked around looking at the ground as he searched for a rock. After finding a smooth round rock, he walked over to his mother's grave and greeted her. I never got to introduce that friend to you, but hopefully you meet him, Izuku said as he pulled out one of his knives and sat down in front of the gravestone. He began to scratch and carve Shinso's name into the rock with his knife. After finishing, he looked at his work and placed the rock in front of his mother's gravestone. His head drooped. Why couldn't just one person stay in his life? He walked home and went to bed, thinking he might just skip another day and go back to school the day after. Tsukachi took a sip of his coffee before looking up and seeing his friend walk into the cafe. The scrawny blonde walked in and looked around before also spotting his friend sitting at a table. He walked over and greeted him. Tsukachi stood up and reached out his hand. Toshinori, how have you been doing lately? Toshinori Yagi took Tsukachi's hand and shook it. Not bad, what about you? Tsukachi put a hand on the back of his neck and gave a tired smile. As best as I can. Both men sat down and a lady came by offering to refill Tsukachi's cup while also taking the order of Toshinori. They both chatted until the question of work eventually came up. Work's been piling up and it doesn't help that there have been a few too many hero deaths recently. Tsukachi took a long sip of his coffee as the second cup was placed down and filled with coffee for Toshinori. I heard about those. It is quite tragic indeed. Such young inspiring heroes taken from the world much too early. Tsukachi mournfully nodded his head. Any suspects so far? We believe it to be Stain. He is known for killing heroes and will do it in bunches. But some things don't add up. Toshinori tilted his head and raised an eyebrow questioningly. Stain kills in groups of 3, but so far from what's been reported, he would stay in the same city until he moves on to the next 3 heroes. Tsukachi took a sip of his coffee, then watched as the liquid rippled. Not only that, but we have video evidence of Stain being spotted in a completely different city at the time of the most recent death. Tsukachi shook his head in confusion as he took another sip of his coffee. What do you know so far? Anything I could possibly help with? Toshinori took a sip of his coffee and his face scrunched up at the bitter taste. The only real information we have so far is that whoever is doing it uses a blade of some sort, and they might have a pretty strong quirk themselves or are working with someone that does. Do you have any idea on what the quirk could be? Could the quirk have something to do with blades? Toshinori finished stirring in some sugar and creamer, then took another sip. Delight filled his face and he instantly smiled at the nice warm taste of his drink. He heard Tsukachi snicker a bit in front of him. If the blades are the quirk itself, it is a possibility, but it could also be someone similar to Stain that uses weapons on top of their quirk. But there is also no physical evidence of a quirk being used. But that doesn't mean a quirk wasn't used. It's probably something pretty strong to be able to kill this many heroes so far. Yes, and that is one of the leading theories. Figuring out the quirk if possible could greatly narrow things down. Toshinori nodded his head. Yes, and hopefully it happens soon. The quicker we can put all this behind us the better, especially when it comes to putting an end to these tragic murders. Tsukachi dropped his head as he thought, but also not wanting to meet his friend's eyes as the possible question surfaced. There is also the small possibility of them having a weak quirk or just not using their quirk because they can't or it doesn't help. He looked up and met his friend's eyes. Toshinori had his cup in front of his mouth ready to take a sip, eyes wide and an eyebrow raised. Toshinori placed his cup down and hit the table in a playful manner as he began laughing. You've never been one to say such a funny joke, he said in between breaths. He calmed down and wiped the tears from his eyes and took a sip of his coffee, smile still on his face. How many heroes so far? Toshinori said, suddenly serious. 5 confirmed so far, but there could be more that we haven't found yet. Tsukachi said hesitantly. 5 dead heroes. There is no possible way someone with a weak quirk can take down 5 trained heroes, Toshinori scoffed. Even more unlikely if a quirk wasn't used at all. That doesn't mean, Tsukachi burst out, then paused as Toshinori stared at him from across the table. He spoke again a bit quieter, that doesn't mean we can rule out the possibility. It is possible, I seriously doubt that. Toshinori mocked as he cut his friend off. Tsukachi was starting to feel a bit uncomfortable now, and as Toshinori continued to stare at him he felt he was shrinking under the gaze. Toshinori wasn't even in his all-might form, and yet Tsukachi couldn't help but feel so small in front of him. He looked down at his watch and released a breath of relief. He looked up at Toshinori and put on a fake smile. I'm sorry to cut things short, but, he pointed down at his watch. I really must get going. I had a prior appointment already scheduled and I would really hate to be late. Tsukachi wasn't lying, but he still didn't like that he was using this as a reason to essentially try to run and leave. Toshinori wore an apologetic smile. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to call you on such short notice and then end up keeping you this long. Both men stood, gathered their stuff, and walked out after paying. They stood in front of the cafe and shook each other's hands once again. It was nice to see you again, and now that I'm in town, you'll probably be seeing more of me. Toshinori smiled. You as well. Whenever you want to meet up again, just give me a call. Tsukachi waved to his friend and they both parted ways. Shinso awoke to the blaring of his alarm and slowly rolled over to turn it off. Laying in bed for at least another 10 minutes, he eventually sat up and tried blinking the grogginess away. The smell of coffee reached his nose and pushed him to get the rest of the way out of bed. Dragging his feet out of his room, he walked into the kitchen, still half asleep. Aizawa was standing by the coffee machine waiting for the lifeline to beep, signifying it was done and ready to drink. Shinso pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. He put his head in one of his hands as his elbow rested on the table. Shinso hadn't realized he'd spaced out a bit when a mug filled with happiness was placed in front of him, bringing him back. Aizawa was standing next to him just staring forward and taking sips out of his mug. He was still sort of waking up along with Shinso. Tsukachi is going to be swinging by to pick us up in about an hour. So, just be ready by then. Shinso sat there for a second thinking but also trying to get his mind in order. Was this really happening? It shouldn't be just him, it should be Izuku here with him. Why did he have to leave? No, he left for a reason. He wasn't running away, right? He wasn't running away from me. No, they were friends, each other's only friends. Shinso felt Aizawa's hand on his head, knocking him out of his thoughts. He took a big gulp of his coffee before looking up at Aizawa. Are you really going to adopt me? Aizawa raised an eyebrow. Kid, we've been over this. Nothing's wrong with your quirk. You have nothing to worry about. And you finally deserve to be in a good home. You've already been staying with me for a few weeks anyway. You basically already live here. Aizawa shot back the rest of his still very much hot coffee, then ruffled Shinso's hair and walked off to get ready. Shinso sat there for a little bit to actually enjoy his drink of pure bliss before eventually going back to his room and also getting ready. Tsukachi was just a few minutes late, but it didn't matter much. Aizawa and Shinso jumped in the car and drove. They arrived about 30 minutes later at the house he didn't realize he would return to. Tsukachi, Aizawa, and he walked up to the door of his last foster house and rang the doorbell. After a few seconds of no answering, Aizawa rang it again, but there was still no answer. They shouldn't be at work yet. I'm pretty sure I got the time right, Tsukachi said as he checked his watch. Tsukachi knocked on the door and in response, it slowly cracked open. Tsukachi and Aizawa looked at each other before both nodding to each other. Tsukachi held his hand over his holstered gun and with the other hand slowly pushed the door open, calling out a hello, as they all stepped in. As they walked farther in, they all separated. Tsukachi and Aizawa walked over to look at something they saw on the ground and Shinso going off to his old room. Shinso stood in front of his old room, took a deep breath. A trembling hand reached for the doorknob, then turned it. Shinso opened the door and his eyes widened. He turned towards the hallway. Hey guys, you might want to come see this. Tsukachi and Aizawa came running down the hall. They all looked into the room as Shinso slowly pushed the door back open. I don't think you're going to be getting those signatures that you needed, Shinso said as all three of them looked at the two bodies laying on the